All right, guys, it looks like we are live as the stream starts booting up all over the interwebs. Uh, we are live on YouTube. We are live on Rumble. We are live on Entropy, and we are live on DLive. So hopefully you'll come in to join us today, and we are going to talk about Rho and 2A and the psychopathology of the synthesized left right after the intro. All right, welcome everyone. This is All Minus One, and I am Bill. Hope you all are having a very happy Sunday. Hope the week has been well for you. It's not been so well for a lot of people, right? The two big issues going on right now, of course, is the kind of weak ruling on two-way. It wasn't super strong, but and then of course the overturning of Roe v. Wade and the reactions to that. And of course, if you are a follower of this channel, you know that I focus on basically two or three things, and that is the weakness and strength of societies, the classical liberal perspective of liberty and freedom, and a first Christian or first century, that is Christian, second, third century Christian type metaphysical perspective. So, with all that, I'm going to tie things in together and we're going to explore what's going on in the world right now. And part of that is what I have been saying about where we are at as a society, if I can get that out. We are in a synthetic society, a society that is synthesized. It is fake. It is created. It is molded up so that that people hold contradictory and conflicting opinions about all manner of issue and are constantly in a state of mental conflict and confusion in which, again, is being placed upon them. So they're psychopathologized and then can be used as tools and weapons by the overlords and elites and media, academia, and the government, right? Or NGOs, whatever else. Globalist, if you would, technocrats. So what I do here is I piece those things together and I kind of show you in a aggregate way and add my 2 cents. And we're going to talk about a lot of these things today, right here on All Minus One. But before we get started, I want to remind everyone again, we are live on YouTube. We are live on DLive. We are live on Rumble and Entropy. Entropy is a free speech site. Whatever you say in the chat will disappear later on. You could donate there as well as donating at Rumble. Or if you want to donate, there is a PayPal linked in the description. But very importantly, today, very specifically, I started early. I wanted to start at 2. That's 2 p.m. Eastern, but I started at 2:30 because I just couldn't get things together quite on time. Because I want to go long. And the last hour of today's show is likely going to be talking about subjects that will not be allowed on YouTube. Therefore, YouTube will go bye-bye at the very end of the show, and I will give you all time to switch over to Rumble if you want to watch the rest of it, where we will talk about what we please. So, with all that, guys, I want to do a little thing that I haven't really done before, but it's going to help me save on time instead of trying to get 1,000,001 links in the show. And that is, I want to look at things that I am that I've looked at this past week, and I just want to show you some things that have popped up, things that I'm interested in, things that I've just randomly followed, but things that also bolster my opinion and my perspective on what is actually going on here, right? Going on with the oligarchs that run everything and going on with the way that they act, unlike, unlike acting like a statesman for the people, these folks are all about themselves. So this was a video I caught while I was driving the other day, and this is from, hold on, this is the full long description. The film archives on YouTube, and it is the U.S. is run by a selfish oligarchy, a ruling elite with a pretend democracy and free market that was released in 1993. And this gentleman here is a journalist back when journalists were actually a real thing and not the thing that they are today, which are basically just activists, sloganeers, gatekeepers, and whatever else. So it's an interesting video. It's an interview. There's a book that he has, of course. Let me actually just open that. The Wish for Kings. Yes. So, again, I don't know if that is the book itself that he was talking about, because I think it's Power Elites in his 1956 books, Interwoven, White Collar. Yeah, I don't know. Either way, interesting video to watch or listen in the background. Here's another one: eugenics, an American campaign to create a master race, a war against the weak. Now, I had an interesting time this morning looking at tweets from people calling Clarence Thomas and Uncle Tom and other things. So I made a tweet myself. I've been using satirical tweets about basically what the left are saying. And so when they're doing this to Clarence Thomas, what they're saying to him is that they're saying, "How dare you not let us murder our babies? You know, the black community needs to murder our babies, you know, because black power and all this other stuff." And basically, they are weakening themselves. They're being morally degenerate, right? They're being highly promiscuous. But this isn't, again, a black person in general. This we know what we're talking about here. We're talking about urban blacks in Democrat-run cities who are in gangs and drugs and a high amount of violence and basically antisocial behaviors. And that's what the left is propping up. That's what they like. And so maybe if we have time, we'll go through that. Hello, hello, folks. Back when you could say something controversial on C-SPAN. Yeah, Steve, exactly. Um, but the origins of Roe, of course, going back to Margaret Sanger, and by the way, Roe was completely made up. The lady has said that she completely made it up, and she was a psychopath. She gave her life to Christ and is a Christian now, but she knows that she made all that stuff up. So the case was founded on nonsense in the first place. There is no constitutional right to murder your child. And yeah, anyways, we'll get into it some more later. And also, this Wednesday on the Ants Justify the Memes, I should have some spiciness along the way. Here's another one: when language is used to deceive you and how doublespeak distorts reality and corrupts thought. 1989. Again, back when people were not so entrenched in the realities, or sorry, not the realities, the synthetic realities of the system. And I found this to be interesting. By the way, those other videos are both on Film Archive. So I found this to be interesting because it seemed to be an honest take about EVs from the car guys. So you can think whatever, but go look into it if you want. Again, things I couldn't necessarily cover. Here's a video from last year, but this gets into the, Gad Saad being an evolutionary psychologist. It gets into the ideas of how we market and manipulate people. It's very important if you want to understand the synthetic society. Baudrillard called this out in the late 50s and early 60s and called it hyperreality, and that is a part of the synthetic society. But hyperreality is just a tool. It's just a means to manipulate. There is a bigger picture, a bigger thing going on that's directing people toward this evil. And then another video that was interesting, I don't know if I agree with. In fact, I think it's quite could be quite wrong, but there, if you like economics and stuff, from Mr. Beat, I found the least bad way to tax. And of course, this is a property value tax, which I'm not sure is a good idea because those things change and you may not have that money. But supposedly it's good. But that's pretty much it for things that I think you all should check out, or I've been looking at, other than what I'll cover on the show today. Um, Violence is Life says, "Yep, Chattanooga gangs been shooting each other lately." Yeah, yeah, the whole thing's a big old mess, right? We uh, we live in this world that wants to hide all the real problems and then make a issue of the non-problems. They want to call what is good evil and what is evil good. And before we get into that totally, I want to watch this video um, about the two-way stuff. And we're not going to watch the whole thing. I just really want to show it to you. I want to show it to you because I want you to I want you to be prepared. I want you to have perspective, and I want you to understand and search for yourself. And so there are some conversations. I just had a conversation the other day with one of my managers about two-way, and he said, "Oh yeah, the right of malicious." And I was like, "Hey, dude, I can give you a book with just like hundreds or thousands of primary source quotes. You can go research them yourself, and detailing what two-way was all about." And that, I just said, that it was not about a militia. They did absolutely believe that the individual had a right to hold a firearm in their own home. They did talk about having collective ownership of firearms at an armory, but then decided against that two-way was an individual right, period. So here, um, this we're not going to play this whole video, but I did clip some things from it, and I want you guys to take a look at this from Tactical Toolbox. So without further ado, we're going to watch this. We're not going to harp or stay on 2A for too long. It is the lesser of the big deals out of this week of the Supreme Court judgments. In fact, Kavanaugh basically said that permits were still constitutional, yada, 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 which is, I mean, shall not be infringed, shall not be infringed. If I have to get a permit to have a firearm, you are infringing my right, period. But, you know, they make a bunch of sophist type arguments, and Kavanaugh's not really that much of a conservative. He's a big corporatist. He's conservative as far as he's Catholic, but he's all about the power of the state, which I find kind of abhorrent with when you're supposed to have a Christian perspective. But again, I come from a different Christian perspective. So let's play this video.
Through this video, we're going to be following this graph right here. And this graph shows the homicide rate in America from 1900 all the way to around 2020 or so. My goal is to understand this graph because you can see up until around 1933, crime rate was going up. Yet from 1933 all the way until around 1968 or so, crime rate was at an all-time low. Then you can see that crime shoots up from the late 60s and maintains all the way until about 1990, 1991. Then it goes down to a historic low, and then it plateaus for about 10 years, and then it goes down even more. Something to keep in mind about this graph. This is overall homicide rate. This includes all homicides, whether they're gang related, whether they're mass shootings, whether they're amongst friends or families or whoever. This is just overall.
So before he gets a little bit further into this video, what happened in the 1960s? Well, liberalism, not classical liberalism, modern liberalism, libertinism, leftism. You had all these academics propping up left-wing ideals. When John Money started his theories, it was around right before this time. When all of the French postmodernists came to America and started teaching in the universities, it was around this time. There was a mass surge of violence in the major cities. They became dilapidated, and it did not drop until the 90s. 30 years, my friends. Now, mind you, the 60s were not the worst, but it kept happening, and it allowed it to get worse, like now. And a big reason, and this is one of the conflicting things, is because the civil rights movement was going on and whatever else, which again, there are issues there, I believe. Now, I don't have any problem with, what your skin tone or your hair color is or your eyes or any of that kind of stuff. That's not the issue. It's always about the culture and the society. But at the time, the rights weren't being applied equally. And so they wanted to make sure that changed. And in doing that, they infringed on states' rights as well, which was bad. And this is when the federal government took another leap toward power. So there were some before that were minor, a little bit more small, but it was one of the biggest leaps toward power since FDR. Before that, I would say you had Wilson. Before that, of course, Teddy Roosevelt. A lot of people don't like to acknowledge his contribution, but he did contribute to the big deep state quite a bit. And then before that, you had Abraham Lincoln. So it's a mixed bag. It's not just Republicans and it's not just Democrats. It's statists or technocrats versus those who would want liberty. And as this happened, the economy was falling apart. People were in shambles. It just seemed like this is the way that cities were going to be. And I mentioned it before, probably last week. The movie The Joker shows this. It's a reflection of that. The Joker is a reflection of the movie Taxi Driver, which was a reflection of that time period. Again, if you haven't seen Taxi Driver, it's a disturbing movie. It's a great movie, but it's disturbing, and it's meant to be because it was nitty and gritty, showing you what was actually going on at the time. So let me play some more of this.
Shootings follow a very different pattern. In fact, mass shootings almost don't follow a pattern at all. And we'll talk about that.
Yeah, you're right, Holly. That's a good point. The sexual revolution, all of this happened around the same time, folks. You understand that this degeneracy came into the United States around this time. It's like the baby boom generation, right? We're doing horrible things.
More here in a little bit, but I want to understand this graph. I want to understand why during the 1940s and 50s and most of the 60s, why weren't there any school shootings when people had access to guns at schools? And the reason I say that is this kind of disputes the claim that having more and easier access to firearms results in less homicide, because the data seems to show otherwise. I mean, we have more laws today than we ever did. I mean, people, you got to pass a background check in order to purchase a firearm today. You got to be at least 18 years old to buy a rifle and 21 years old to buy a handgun. Yet the media and the politicians are trying to tell us that, oh, it's too easy for people to get their hands on a gun. If you're the kind of person that believes in this rhetoric, and I hate to break it to you, but if you go to a gun store, if you have a legal, say, a state issued marijuana.
I have some of those guns, just saying.
Marijuana card, you're not going to be able to buy a gun. If you have a felony on your record, you're not going to be able to have a gun. If you've had any drug related misdemeanors on your record, you're not going to be able to buy.
That's a big wall of sexy, by the way. And you guys know that I actually take I wrestle with this, but I take a pacifist stance. But guns aren't just for killing people, and they're not just for hunting either. Even if you're a vegan, you're going to have to kill animals on occasion to protect your crops. So let's keep those things in mind.
A gun. If you've had any types of domestic violence in your life that's ever been reported, you're not going to be able to buy a gun. If you've had any types of mental illness that show that you'll be a threat to yourself or others, you're not going to be able to buy a gun. So what do these politicians think they're actually going to do? Because here's the problem. To put this in an analogy of what politicians are trying to do right now, they're trying to say something like this. Drunk driving is at an all-time high. And so in order to prevent drunk drivers, we're going to require that every American install an interlock device into their car. Even if they have a squeaky clean record, you're going to have to get an interlock device. And you're going to have to pay for it every month and blow into it before you can drive your car, just because drunk driving is on the increase and people are dying. If the government did that, people would freak out. But that's exactly what they're trying to do with guns. What they're trying to push is this narrative that because some lunatic who had never committed a crime legally purchased a gun and then went out and committed a crime with it, you can't punish people for crimes they haven't committed yet. That's why they're not denied access to firearms. So you might be wondering, why is it in America that we really try to resist gun control in the first place? Well, in order to understand that, we need to understand what the Second Amendment really states and what it really means.
So this is that well-regulated militia argument. Now, the militia was important because it was a citizen body of soldiers and police, you could put it that way, where the individual, this isn't different from a lynching, mind you, this was justified. These people would be deputized or whatever else. They'd have been conscripted or volunteered. And it would have been through a sort of legal process. It wasn't just like willy-nilly, oh boy, we got this guy over here, we need to go get him. I mean, if in an emergency, yes, but again, they would not kill them. They would turn them over to the sheriff or some sort of authority. And the militia, the idea of the militia was that we did not want standing armies because standing armies are a bane to the liberties that we want. The founders knew this. They knew this in all cases. And we're not supposed to have a standing army as Americans. We have one. We have had one, but this is why the Congress must authorize it every year and the spending for it. Every year. It is not in the original intent of our founders. What started the regular army, though, what they used to call regulars back in the day versus militia, was the Barbary Pirate Wars, more or less. And Jefferson felt like he had no choice but to commission a navy to go after these people who were enslaving Americans. So, in any case, I'll let the video play some more. I'm only going to play, he's going to show another video that you guys should check out, but just go to his channel. I showed you, it's Tactical Toolbox. Find the video. For the sake of time, like I said, I have a lot of stuff I want to cover today. I don't think I'm only going to play a couple minutes of it, but I have this thing clipped. It's like 30 or 40 minutes. But again, I'm not going to play the whole video.
And I'm going to cut in a video clip here. I can't find the original uploader to give him credit. I downloaded this video from his channel a long time ago because I knew it was going to be a matter of time before it got deleted, and it did. And I can't find his channel anymore. So if you know the name of his channel, please put it in the comments, and then we can give him credit for it.
But now we need to get into certain contemporary issues with the Second Amendment. And first and foremost,
and this channel I've watched before too, and I can't recall the name of it because it's been so long. So, he probably got yeeted. And, if anyone knows who this is, then throw it in the chat, please.
Foremost, we have to deal with the language and grammatical structure controversy, because apparently people these days don't know how to read or comprehend language and historical context. So there are people who actually believe that the Second Amendment only allows the right of the people in a militia to keep and bear arms. And this is where we get into grammar Nazi territory and have to analyze each and every phrase of the Second Amendment. But to preface, you need to understand that words mean what they mean when they were written. Now thankfully, the late Justice Antonin Scalia did most of the research for this next part in his opinion of the court on DC versus Heller. First, let's get into the prefatory and operative clauses, both of which are present in the language of the Second Amendment. A prefatory clause announces a purpose, while the operative clause announces the resolution or action to be taken or not taken. And here's how the clauses are split up in the Second Amendment. Let's start with the operative clause and dissect it phrase by phrase. The right of the people. This phrase is used 2 other times in the Bill of Rights, once in the First Amendment and once in the Fourth Amendment. And there's also similar phrasing in the Ninth Amendment. But each time it is used unambiguously to describe individual rights, not collective rights, or rights that can only be exercised through participation in some corporate body, or a militia. There are 3 other provisions in the Constitution that strictly use the phrase the people, once in the preamble, once in Article 1, Section 2, and once in the 10th Amendment. And in each of those instances, the phrasing of the people is not used in the context of individual rights, but collective powers, powers that belong to the people. In each.
So, as many of you have been watching me for however long now, I've been doing this for 2 years. I think my audience has grown more in the last year or so, even though it's been a little inconsistent here, which I'm really working on. In any case, you would know I have mentioned this numerous times, the false dichotomy between individual and collective. We're going to address this later when we get into psychopathy, very specifically. But there is individualism and your responsibility as an individual and your responsibility to other people as a good person, right? And that is your part of the collective, right? Because we are social beings. The problem comes from the over individualism and over collectivism. For instance, I live in a neighborhood which is a collective under an HOA, which my HOA sucks like everyone's, but I'm not getting into the business of my neighbor's life down the street, right? We all live in this collective, and yet we all live these little individual lives. Now, my neighbor that lives right next door, we're going to have to interact a little bit more, and there might have to be some compromises we make on certain things. This is the proper dichotomy and understanding that. And then on top of that, understanding your responsibility as an individual to other people. Yes, you are your brother's keeper, plain and simple. You do not harm other people. You try to let them be, but you also need to have your boundaries and don't let them infringe and encroach upon you.
Of these instances, the people refers to the exercising or reservation of powers, such as the reserving of power to people in the 10th Amendment or the exercising of powers in Article 1, Section 2. Not rights, powers. Nowhere else in the Constitution does a right attributed to the people refer to anything other than an individual right. What's more is that in all instances of the phrase the people, it is used in reference to a class of people who are members of a national community or connection with this country.
That's the collective. It's pretty loose, isn't it?
Meaning that when we say the people, we are not referring to subsets of people, like people in a militia, but are referring to the whole people. This is in opposition to the prefatory clause when it mentions the militia, as a militia is a subset of people. So reading the Second Amendment as protecting only the right to keep and bear arms in an organized militia, therefore fits poorly with the operative clause's description of the holder of that right as the people. Another thing to understand about prefatory and operative clauses is that a prefatory clause does not limit or expand the scope of an operative clause. In fact, as stated in a general treatise on statutes by Sir Fortunatus Dwars from 1848, it is nothing unusual in acts for the enacting part to go beyond the preamble. The remedy often extends beyond the particular act or mischief which first suggested the necessity of the law. And in regards to the English court case Copeman v. Gallant in 1716, the Lord Chancellor Hardwicke stated that I can by no means allow of the notion that the preamble shall restrain the operation of the enacting clause, and that because the preamble is too narrow or defective, therefore the enacting clause, which has general words, shall be restrained from its full latitude, and from doing that good which the words would otherwise and of themselves import.
So that the right of the militia, or the militia portion, does not limit the rest of the clause, the rest of the scope of the document. And of course, we have the historical arguments. We have what the Supreme Court put in there for the historical arguments, and then people to then, like, this is utterly insane to then turn around and say, no, it's not an absolute right. How dare you? How dare you mock our Constitution, yada, yada, yada. And then go and say, but your right to kill your baby, well, that's in the Constitution explicitly. Because it's my right to privacy. Okay, psychopath. Okay. Yes, you're absolutely right, Steve. There are 100% multiple clauses in almost every state constitution. I'm from Maryland. Maryland has a right to bear arms, I believe, in their constitution, yet they are highly restrictive. I was just hanging out with my buddy last night watching UFC fights, and he was talking about maybe trying to get his permit. I mean, it's so insane that in Maryland that while I worked at the sheriff's department, there were people I knew who worked there who had specific death threats. And the people that were giving them death threats knew where their kids, played whatever sports, right? We'll leave it there. And now these people oftentimes are just trying to intimidate you. They're not necessarily going to follow up on it. But when that happens, they want to be able to protect themselves. Well, in Maryland, you can't just carry. So they went to the sheriff and said, hey, blah, blah, blah. Now, he did it for one guy, and then a few other people had asked, and he wouldn't do it for them either. So that's a problem. That's a problem on multiple levels. The sheriff, fortunately, is retiring this year. He was a horrible sheriff. I've worked for him for years. I have no problem saying that. Tell him to his face. I mean, it doesn't, he's actually a kind of a nice guy, but he's absolutely lost. He's a terrible leader. Nobody likes him. And he's got a lot of other problems too, but whatever. I can tell you that they didn't care. They didn't think that it was acceptable to allow these people under their care to potentially do something to protect themselves or their families. And they would rather say, oh, nothing's going to happen, and then allow something to happen and someone to get hurt, someone's child die. And in retrospect, say, well, how was I supposed to know? I'm sorry. Right? That's what I'm talking about, being your brother's keeper. Right? That kind of stuff. You're harming them by your action. You're hindering them. That's bad. Not good. Right? Let's keep going.
So when you talk about something particular, like a militia, that doesn't then constrain the following phrase of the people into the context of a militia, meaning that the Second Amendment...
Steve, yeah, I've known people too, security people, certain people, yeah, you can get one. It's just not easy. But I've even played video here on the show before with people in Baltimore saying they had a concealed carry permit. So it's possible, but it depends on your job. And I lived in a rural county. So what I'm saying is that's how twisted and demented this stuff is. I've talked about it before too, where I've had a people I've worked for when we went through constitutional carry here in West Virginia, and thinking that it was going to be the Wild West, and the Wild West wasn't really that wild, folks. The most wild part of the Wild West was probably fighting with the very, very aggressive natives. And I know everyone makes excuses for why they were aggressive. The reason why they were aggressive is because they've been aggressive for thousands of years, fighting each other too. I mean, anyways, as far as like people dying, I think like Deadwood, like the height of the bloodiness of Deadwood, like 9 people died in a year. We have 50 people die every weekend in Chicago and Baltimore, or get shot at least. They might not die. All right, I'm only going to play a couple more minutes of this, and again, you guys should go check it out. But there's another part of this video. This video is about, what did I show you? I showed it to you. It's about an hour and a half or something long. Again, tactical toolbox. Let me bring it back up. She's a loading. Yeah, says we're not ready for what's coming. And the channel is the Tactical Toolbox. Yeah, it's about an hour and 20 minutes long.
protects an individual right of all Americans. So now we move on to the phrase to keep and bear arms. Let's start with the word arms. The 18th century meaning of the word arms is the exact same meaning as it is today.
Any weapon. Any.
In the 1773 edition of Samuel Johnson's dictionary, it defined the word arms as weapons of offense or armor of defense. And the 1771 legal dictionary by Timothy Cunningham defined the word arms as anything that a man wears for his defense, or takes into his hands, or useth in wrath.
So that also includes body armor then too, right? But primarily arms is always known as any weapon. The Second Amendment does not say the right of the people to keep firearms shall not be infringed. It says arms of any type, including nukes.
To cast at or strike another. And even the 1828 Webster's American Dictionary of the English language also uses the same phrasing. And even today's Webster's definition of the word arms is the exact same as it was back then. The word arms, then as now, does not apply only to military service or service in connection to a militia. In fact, here's an example sentence from Timothy Cunningham's 1771 legal dictionary. Servants and laborers shall use bows and arrows on Sundays, and not bear other arms. Even the 1783 thesaurus titled The Distinction Between Words Synonymous in the English Language, while it may have limited the term arms to instruments of offense generally made use of in war, it also states that arms constitute all firearms. At this point, some of you might be seeing now how this intersects with the "it only applies to muskets" argument. We'll get to that in a bit, but let's finish off this militia argument.
Which is a stupid thing. It only applies to muskets. Then your First Amendment right only applies to the printing press, not text, not electronic printing, not any of that stuff, right? It only applies to the quill pen, It only applies to you being on the street corner without a bullhorn, because they didn't have those back then. It doesn't apply to me streaming now, or the news media, or how modern journos do anything, because they use video cameras and stuff and microphones. Doesn't apply. Now, you all know this argument. It's a simple one, but it's true, because that's not how the Constitution works. The Constitution is a document of principles that limit the government. Doesn't grant freedoms to us. It limits the government.
So now let's dig into the meaning of the word keep. Going back to the 17...
That would work, Kizza, if Maryland was not founded as a Catholic state. So, but you rest assured that Catholics were often prosecuted in America early on, and other Christians fought with other Christians, which again I've addressed. The Bible predicts this. I find it funny that people tell me that God isn't real, and I believe in a bunch of myths, and I'm like, yeah, you know how much history those words have predicted long before it occurred, and is coming true even now as we speak.
1983 thesaurus, it defines the word keep as, we keep what we intend not to part with. We keep that which is our own. And the 1773 edition of a dictionary of the English language defines it as to retain, not to lose, and to have in custody. So now, knowing what arms means, to keep arms can most naturally be read as to have weapons. Now, there's no specific phrasing of to keep arms in a dictionary, but the way the phrase was commonly used and referred to was as a way of possessing arms, both individually and also in regards to a militia.
All right, I'm going to leave that one there. There's more of that. Go check it out if you want. There's another video I want to play. Before I get into that, I actually want to just bring up this book here, The Founders' Second Amendment, Origins of the Right to Keep and Bear Arms, by Stephen P. Hellbrook, who has argued in the Supreme Court for gun rights. This book is a list of primary sources. It's not just a list, obviously, but it has a ton of them, has a ton of the arguments, has the history of where the First Amendment came from, what they argued about, has the quotes from people. We mentioned Maryland. Martin Luther was a strong advocate of the right to bear arms, and he was one of the people that actually pushed on the idea of the Second Amendment. So keep that in mind. Now, toward the end of this video, the gentleman from Tactical Toolbox, of course, he's making his own content, is giving some good advice, bringing up some interesting facts. And I want to, I think this ties in nicely. I want to address that. I want to look at the end of the video, think of some ideas of what's going on in our society, and then I'm going to segue into something that's seemingly unrelated, but you'll see where it goes.
Now, these are some serious statistics. You might look at this and go, okay, what's going on here? Well, maybe one thing that's happening here is that there's a whole bunch of people who are potentially suicidal and they're contemplating suicide, and what the suicide story does is it accelerates that process. It's like a catalyst for something that would probably happen anyway. But that's not really what the data is saying, because if that was true, we'd expect a big spike in the number of suicides.
Sorry, guys, I meant to preface this. So I could have, for the sake of time, I cut it where I cut it. But this gentleman is talking about the implications of the media talking about suicide and posting statistics, and how that sometimes seemingly causes the numbers to jump. And so it is standard practice, generally speaking, in the media to not post those things. And I actually have a link. So, media reporting suicide. Do we need more than guidelines? The media coverage on suicide has substantially increased over recent decades. Well, that wasn't supposed to happen. Give you my page back. Feeling like I'm going to have to do some things to my computer because it's feeling like it's a little slow today. Anyways, my media coverage on suicide has substantially increased over recent decades, with 6,859 suicides reported in the UK and Republic of Ireland in 2018, a rise of 11.8% compared to previous years, according to the Office of National Statistics. Now, I mentioned this last week. I talked about this. I've talked about suicide numerous times on this show because it's a horrible thing that people do to themselves when they feel completely lost and disenfranchised. Sometimes it's the society that puts it onto them. Often it is not. It is the interpersonal workings that are going on in relationships or whatever else. However, I would say, again, it's both, in that people have these unstable interpersonal relationships because they start from unstable interpersonal relationships with their families, and that is because the society teaches degeneracy. So it teaches us to be hedonistic, to be libertine, and to be selfish. And all of that is in the guise of selflessness. It's interesting, but it's the truth. Excuse me. In February 2020, the suicide of British public figure attracted global attention, including extensive media coverage. Hannah Scott reviewed 2 studies on the experience of people bereaved by the media report after the suicide and concluded that providing a media spokesperson to the families of the people who died by suicide at work with the press could be an effective solution, but this would be practically difficult. A more achievable solution would be to update existing guidelines. And again, that's because suicides tend to go up. Current media guidelines focus on avoiding the relationship of explicit details in the suicide in order to prevent copycat behavior. So there you go. Back to the video.
In the month or two after the story was presented, because what we'd expect to see is a whole bunch of people who are considering suicide rush out and take their lives in the aftermath of the story. And then the number of suicides should go down into the negative territory for a while. However, that's not what this data shows. And that's why this data appears so scary, because the massive increase in the number of suicides all occurred around the time when the story was presented. And then the number goes down thereafter, suggesting that these are excess deaths. These are surplus deaths that wouldn't have happened if it hadn't been for the publicised suicide story in the media. Phillips also looked at...
This guy's eyes are getting all reptilian-like. I don't know if you guys noticed that, the little flash from the lights and stuff in his eyes looks kind of creepy. Anyways, let's keep going.
At a number of suicides following the deaths of 8 presidents of the United States between 1900 and 1968, including after the assassination of JF Kennedy, and found no statistically significant increase in the number of suicides following these high-profile deaths. Nevertheless, a number of agencies around the world have developed national journalism codes to promote responsible reporting of suicides. These codes highlight the importance of using extreme restraint when publishing stories about deaths, such as avoid starting a television newscast with a story about suicide, avoid including the word suicide in the headlines, avoid placing a suicide story on the cover of a newspaper or magazine, avoid sensationalising or romanticising suicide, avoid mentioning the details of the methods used, and keep the number of suicide stories at a minimum, and so on. So in many cases, if there's a suicide, media professionals use coded language to report the story. And sometimes we really have to read between the lines to find out how people took their own lives. Even though there are guidelines for media professionals to follow when reporting stories about suicide, it's up to the individual media professional to decide whether or not to follow them. A few years later, in 1979, Phillips claimed that the number of single driver vehicle fatalities increased by 31% 3 days following publicised suicides. He claimed that as the number of suicides publicised increased, so did the number of vehicle fatalities. Does this seem ridiculous to you? What could be going on here? There could be a couple of reasons. One reason could be that after seeing the suicide story in the media, people may become more reckless. Maybe a big story distracts people or kind of gets people in a different state of mind. Another reason is maybe these aren't accidents. Maybe some of these people are using their cars to kill themselves. Maybe hiding behind some of these car accidents are suicides. People are purposely driving off the road in their cars, slamming into trees and so on to take their own lives. It doesn't stop here. Phillips also found that the number of non-commercial plane crashes and airline crashes also increased after publicised suicides. He claimed that the spike in the number of plane fatalities persisted for around 9 days. He even claimed that the more suicide stories were reported in the mass media, the more the number of airline crashes and non-commercial plane crashes increased.
You know, the Werther effect is something I studied when I was in college, when I was taking an abnormal psych course. I did an entire paper on this and studied it very thoroughly.
By the way, this is back to, he played that clip. This is back to the tactical toolbox guy sitting here talking about his experiences with suicide and abnormal psychology, right?
Data seems to state that just talking about it on the news is going to give these kids social validation to commit these atrocities. How do we actually prevent it? We stop talking about it. All these news stations, they don't care about these kids. The only thing these news stations care about is creating fear. Because if they can create fear, they can create a profit. Because every time you watch a video, even my videos, if that video happens to be monetized, I'm gonna make money. Every time you click an ad, someone makes money. So these news stations don't give a crap about these kids.
Okay, so let's we'll come back to that. Let's talk about that for a minute. Fear and profit. It's not just profit, and I wish people would quit saying this. It is control. We know that death itself is not a high factor in psychological motivation because it's too abstract. All you know is consciousness and existence. Now, this, for me, is in part a proof of God as well. And we're going to talk about that here in a minute. But what you have to understand is that if I can make you afraid, then I can make you a slave. Because that is the root of all of it, is enslaving you. See, love does not enslave. Fear does. Hate enslaves. Abuse enslaves. Psychopathologizing people enslaves them. Making them hedonistic enslaves them to their passions. And that's what this is about. Fear is a passion. It is an emotional response to feeling like you have no control, and if you don't take action, you're something really bad is going to happen to you. You're going to feel a lot of pain, right? And that's what it's really about. Fear and pain are controlling factors. So if I can make you suffer physically, emotionally, mentally, then I can have control over you. And then if I kind of take it away and say, well, let me protect you, that fear of your suffering then gives me leverage over you. And if I can contrive something and make you, convince you that I didn't cause the problem, but the problem exists and I am the solution to the problem, well, then, because of your fear, you were willing to give up all of your autonomy to me. That's what is going on.
Care about is what's the next thing that bleeds, because that thing is going to lead and make us money. Now let's talk about what I think is actually going on and how they can actually.
And you'll hear Tim Pool talk about it. I haven't heard him say it in a while, but if it leads, it bleeds. Yeah. Or if it bleeds, it leads. Of course. Tool, the band, wrote a song called Vicarious, right? Of course, they write things interestingly. Basically, the guitarist and the drummer and all, they do their own things, and then they get the things together, and then Maynard off on the side writes lyrics. But what's that song about? It's about being an emotional vampire. That, my friends, again, is a form of psychopathy. This is running our society.
Prevent people from buying guns without passing any more gun control legislation. So if we look back at history, going back to 1934, like we talked about with the National Firearms Act, they didn't really ban anything. They just increased the price to own it. You know, as I mentioned earlier, in 1934, a $200 tax stamp is equivalent to $4,315.06 in today's dollar. Nobody.
And if you want to buy a fully automatic weapon, you're going to pay prices like that, and actually much, much higher. We all know about the Daniel Defense AR-15s used recently. If you want a fully automatic weapon and you can get the tax stamp as well as the weapon itself, you are going to be paying thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars. Now, I don't know why you want an automatic weapon. They're cool, they're fun, but unless you're using squad tactics and know anything about fire support and yada, 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 you're just going to waste your ammo, most likely. You know, there's actually like legitimate uses for automatic fire, and it's not what most people think.
Nobody in the 1930s, except for the uber wealthy, could afford that. Moving on over to the 1986 full auto ban. They banned anything that was made after 1986, but if you had the money to buy a full auto that was made before 1986, then you could own it. And just for those of you that don't know, like to buy an M16 or something that was made prior to 1986, it's going to be upward $25,000 to $35,000.
Well, there you have it.
If not more in today's dollars, just because there's such low supply of a pre-ban M16. Yeah, you pay your $200 tax stamp, but you're going to pay over 25 grand for that one gun. I mean, yeah, they kind of outlawed it, but they made it legal for a price.
And these were the compromises, I would say, that Reagan made. I don't think Reagan was actually a globalist. He looked into the gold standard and a bunch of other stuff. People say different things. I mean, obviously, there was a point in Reagan's career where he was known as Red Ronnie. But I actually think that he brought back some good things to the U.S. And the 80s were good, man. They were pretty good. We came out of the 80s into the early 90s, and crime started to go down. So there, you know, for me, growing up, I was young, but being born in 81, I remember a large portion of the 80s, and I can tell you, I always reflected back on it, I still do, as like a period like the 1950s where everything was kind of safe and stable. I know that there are other things going on underneath the surface as an adult now. I mean, obviously, the movie They Live was written during the 80s. There were people that were disenfranchised. There are always going to be people that are disenfranchised because evil forces rule the world. You know, Christ said that the poor will always be with us. I believe that. I don't think that there's any solution to that. Most people who are poor, don't get me wrong, there are things in the system that stop people from being poor, but most people are poor because of their own choices, at least in the US, right? There's plenty of opportunity here. They choose to be hedonistic. They choose to spend their money on the wrong things. They choose to do things that are self-destructive because, you know, again, as I always say, we have no identity. We don't have an identity or a sense of strong self and a sense of direction, a sense of purpose. You need purpose in order to have a fulfilled life, in order to make an impact on this world. And if you don't have those things, you're going to just drift along like a reed blowing in the wind.
And I think it's going to be the same thing moving forward, except it's going to be a lot more sinister. Now, I want to be very clear. I'm not saying that this is what's going to happen.
Yeah, I got you. Yeah, the economy was wrecked. It was bad. And that's because of Carter, Ford, Nixon, and I don't know about JFK, honestly. But that was not, he was inheriting a really bad thing. And again, that's what I'm saying. We are repeating this. We can see this. We can see this in the left-wing violence being repeated. In the 1960s, the rise of left-wing violence came up in the United States. You had the Weather Underground, you had the Black Panthers, you had all kinds of groups who were carrying out pretty nasty stuff. You had the height of the mafiosos and their power. You had a lot of deranged and sick things going on in America. But it's because of the nature of our society. Again, back then, it wasn't as technocratic as it is today, but it was the beginning of the technocrats. That started in, again, the kind of the Wilson administration, but very specifically, very, very hardcore with FDR. I'm not saying there weren't technocrats before that. I'm just saying that this push for this progressive fascism which is what it is, with the corporate marriage in the state and the oligarchy ruling the people versus the Constitution and the people ruling the oligarchy. Because it is basically what our government was set up to be. It was set up to be an oligarchy, but an oligarchy that could not maintain its power thoroughly for long periods of time. And a oligarchy that represented the people directly. We're too overbloated, though. We have a scaling issue. We have an issue where we have less representation for the population and more bureaucracy and complete and utter unaccountability. It's bad. Oh yeah, the cocaine wars in Miami, right? I mean, there's all kinds of stuff, man. Lots of stuff that was going on, and of course, the government was involved in that as well. You know, I'm not here like trying to be a Reagan apologist. I just think that he gets a lot of flack sometimes for being far from certain people on the right for being far worse than he was. He was like one of the best presidents we've had in like since Ike, and Ike, you know, wasn't the best either, but he was a lot better than the presidents we had before that.
I'm just saying, I think that the things that we're seeing in the news today are a complete distraction. You know, for probably the past 15 years, I've kind of looked at the news as to whenever they're really pushing something, I always ask myself one question. What are they trying to distract me from? And then I go digging. So aside from seeing, you know, all these mass atrocities, you know, being inundated in the past couple of weeks on the news, we're seeing a bunch of other things, right?
I just a broad question here. I don't generally like posting these guys' names and whatever else, but it's in this video. But of these guys, do any of them look really that stable? You know, maybe the guy from Buffalo looks the most, but we know that he wasn't. We know the Virginia Tech shooter was very unhinged. The Parkland shooter, I mean, that guy looks crazy. Uvalid, whatever. That guy he was transgender, so obviously he's quite confused. And of course, the guy from Sandy Hook. I mean, these people don't look like stable people in the first place. Kind of like leftists don't look like stable people in the first place.
We're being distracted by Amber Heard trial and Johnny Depp. We're being distracted with gas prices. We're being distracted with food prices. It's all fear. We've been distracted by a virus for the past 2 years. But what's really happening behind the scenes is something called the CBDC, or what's called the central bank digital currency. Now, in order for this to make sense, most people don't realize that the Federal Reserve is not a federally owned bank. It's actually a privately owned bank. Now, prior to 1913, the Federal Reserve was actually owned by the United States government.
I hate to pull a Hassan Piker, but I'm gonna step away for a moment. Since I don't think Hassan actually streams half the time, he just plays other people's stuff. But I'm gonna step away from the moment, let this play, and I'll be right back.
But a bunch of the big bankers such as JP Morgan and things of that nature, they created a market crash. Basically what they did was they created a bunch of bank scares. They printed out a bunch of articles in newspapers that said that the banks will lose your money. So go get your money out of the bank. Now, if you don't understand how banking works, banks don't ever have all of everyone's cash on hand. They loan it out, they invest some of it to gain interest. And what happened was all these people rushed out to create mass withdrawals, and it caused the banks to fail. And out of that fear, they pushed the Federal Reserve Act, which in turn turned over our Federal Reserve over to private bankers. And what's funny about that is they promised that this would curb inflation and all this stuff, but it's actually had the opposite effect. Now, interesting thing about this was the Federal Reserve Act was passed on December 23rd of 1913. And they actually voted on it when most of the members of Congress were out of town visiting their family. And so no one was actually present to vote against it. And then, years later in 1971, I think it was President Nixon who abolished the gold standard. And now we print money and then we increase inflation, and inflation basically robs people of whatever their wealth is. So if a pack of gum cost you 50 cents yesterday and we create inflation, it's now going to cost you $1. So whatever money you have in your account is essentially worth half of what it was. It's a way of robbing the American people. And as you can see, by adjusting inflation, you can adjust what people can afford and can't afford. But this isn't enough control for them. They need one other method of control if they want to prevent people from buying things, especially things like guns. So let me introduce you to something called PCA, also known as Personal Carbon Allowance. Now, because of this climate change stuff that everybody's been talking about, right now, large corporations that create a large carbon footprint have to buy what's called a carbon credit. And a carbon credit is created from projects in the world that are supposed to recapture or prevent carbon from being created. And every carbon credit is certified to offset 1 metric ton of carbon output. Big corporations that manufacture things like, say, Tesla, right? Like the manufacturing of electric cars is quite carbon intensive. They would have to buy a ton of these carbon credits in order to offset how much carbon they create. They want this.
Which is all a bunch of nonsense. Carbon is the basis of life. There is a thing called organic, which means that you're a carbon-based organism. And that's essentially what's going on, right? Is they're trying to go after life itself. We have plants all over the world that breathe in carbon and then release oxygen. Yet this is the most horrible, evil thing ever to, causing global warming and yada, yada, yada. And we don't even have enough understanding of how the atmosphere and the climate changes in direct relation to human causes, potential additives causes, and the sun and other factors. We do know that from ice core samples that the Earth was actually a lot cooler, and we've been coming out of an ice age. And we also know that a rise in global temperatures would actually be majorly beneficial to humankind via the not desertification, which is the lie that they tell you, but what would that be called? The proliferation of the growth of crops and the like, starting to be able to farm agriculturally in some other areas that maybe in the past were too cold year round. Of course, now there is this thing being pushed out there of sudden adult syndrome, sudden adult death syndrome, that is, or dying because it's getting too hot outside. Well, heat stroke's always been a thing. Heat illness is a real thing. I'm particularly very aware of it from being in the military and being an infantry guy, always having a lot of gear on, always moving in very hot situations. It is a big factor. I'm particularly aware of it right now because I have a little girl, a baby. She just turned 1 year old, and she hit her first milestone in age, right? And we were having a party yesterday, and even yesterday, it's like there's some factors with the heat, even though she was playing in water and other stuff that seemed to affect her. She's a baby; she's not used to it. When the heat first came here for the summer, it was really bad. Now it's not so bad because I've acclimated. This is part of the human condition, right? But my point is yes, people have always been able to have always passed or gotten quite ill because of being overheated. But they're making it out to be, since the introduction of certain medical procedures, they're making it out to be a sudden new thing, and they're trying to tie it to climate change, and it's just nonsense. If you guys weren't here at the very beginning of the show, I am going to talk about some of this stuff and those certain medical procedures very specifically at the last part of the show, and it will be streamed everywhere but YouTube. We're going to say goodbye to YouTube at the last hour and be exclusively on Rumble and Entropy, because YouTube does not like to, they don't like free speech, but aside from that, they don't like to tell the truth. They want you to hear misinformation. They want to psychopathologize you. They want the civil war that's coming. They want all of these things. YouTube is part of the problem. I use the platform because it is the most optimal way for me to grow. It has the most users. But Rumble is the future. So keep that in mind. Anyways, let's keep going.
Net zero type deal. So what does that mean? So one, that means if companies are going to have to buy these carbon credits to offset things, prices are just going to go up. So you remember seeing this video probably from 2020 from the Davos group saying the Great Reset, you'll own nothing and be happy. Well, this is how they're going to do it. A lot of these think tanks, especially those at the Davos group and the World Economic Forum, want to apply a PCA or a personal carbon allowance. And essentially what that would mean is every single month, every person in a nation would be assigned a specific carbon allowance. So for example, the average human being produces, I think, 7.5 metric tons of carbon in a year. So they would divide that up amongst 12 months. Now, what happens if you go beyond that carbon allowance for the month? Well, then you're going to have to pay a carbon tax, and you're going to have to go buy a carbon credit. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. All these environmentalists and stuff, they don't like us eating meat. They don't like us buying gas. And guess what else they probably don't want us buying? Guns. Now, my assumption is they're going to start assigning, like, this product creates this much carbon, therefore you're going to have to offset that as well. Let's just say, for example, you got $1,000 in your bank account and you want to go buy gas, but you've used up your allotment for personal carbon allowance for the month for gas. Well, then the government's going to say, no, you can't buy that. And I'll tell you how they're going to track it here in a second. Or let's say you want to go buy meat for a cookout with your friends and family. And they're like, you know what? You've bought too much meat this month. You went over your personal carbon allowance. You're either going to have to pay us this fee to buy a carbon credit to offset that, or we're going to deny your charge. Or what if you wanted to buy some ammunition? What if you wanted to buy a firearm? What if you...
So in my religion, that's just a myth that doesn't exist and it's completely fake and made up, false dreams, because we're all just big meat puppets and we're just animals, and so we should be able to do whatever we want. And that it has this very important thing in it that talks about the mark of the beast. And what the mark is, I'm actually going to probably do some pretty detailed stuff on this really soon. I might stream this Thursday, guys, because I'm not going to be working on Thursdays anymore. So I might be doing Sunday and Thursdays on All Minus One. And if that's the case, I think I'm going to talk about religious stuff specifically, metaphysics and, things of the ancient world. No man's supposed to be able to buy or sell. It's really interesting how this comes through all this. It also says that there's a false prophet. Now, for years, I've struggled with understanding what that is, but that's because it hasn't come to the light to me until now. And there is a false prophet. You're either on the right side or the wrong side of history based on the prophetic announcements of Karl Marx. And that is the religion that they study. And again, we're going to segue to that in a minute. But keep this in mind. Keep this in mind that this is the plan or the goal. First, there is the inflationary tax. Then there are all the other millions of other taxes they put onto you, plus the fact that their money is fiat, right? And then they're going to add this. And everything that they're doing is about the way of death. Because as many times as I will say it, many of you won't hear it. There are two paths in life. There is the way of life and the way of death. And the way of death is the way of this world. It is the powers and principalities of the air that rule over death, and they also rule over the kings of this earth. Now, again, you may not accept my spiritual beliefs, my metaphysics, but at least understand that that is psychologically correct. It is correct in how these things are going about.
Used too much electricity this month. Are they going to cut your power off? I don't think they will actually cut people's power off, especially in hot states or in extreme climate states.
I'll address this very specifically, but no, I don't think it has anything to do with the chip in the hand or anything like that. No, I'm not saying that you should get chipped, but it directly relates to, and I'm going to use some clips from this YouTube channel that I found just the other day, and they do really good videos I don't know if their theology is completely 100% correct, but they're pretty good. They're pretty good. And what I can say is they talk about this. I've known this for 20 years. As far as I can tell, it was something, well, maybe not quite 20 years, at least 15. But it's something that God revealed to me. And it is the mark on your hand and your forehead has to relate back to other scriptures. And it does. It has to do with your work, your labor, and your mind and your thought. And who do you give that to? Do you give it to God, or do you give it to the forces of evil? And 666 very specifically references money, because there are 666 talents that King Solomon collected in a year. So that's in the book of what is it, Second Kings, First Kings, Second Kings. I can't recall off the top of my head, but it's one of those. Or if you're an Orthodox, that would be like Third or Fourth Kings. Either way, kingdoms. And that money that he collected, of course, was a tax. And it lists all the other things that he had, and yada, yada, yada. King Solomon was an evil man. He was wise. God gave him wisdom, but he became an evil man. He was corrupted. And that's a story time and time again throughout the scriptures. None of the men are perfect except for Christ. But that specifically, 666, and not just that reference to Solomon, the things that he did, and all of the themes of the Bible, because the Bible is the first ever hyperlinked book written over 1,500 years. And yet somehow, by different authors, somehow it all converges together and continually predicts the future. This was a calling to man. It is man's number. Now, a man, sure, we can point to Nero specifically, but the Bible, again, has many layers of reality to it in the simple text, right? It's multi-dimensional. And so the number of man is 6 because he was created on the 6th day. And the institutions of man are the economies of men, the banks, the religions of men, the false religions, and the governments of men, the false governments. Because all of those things are from God, and anything that is not from God is idolatry. All right, made my point. Let's go on.
Because you would kill people. I mean, I wouldn't put it past them, but I don't think they would. They'll just tax you. But for other things, they would just deny the charge until you buy the carbon credit to offset it. Now, how are they going to track this? Let me introduce you to something called the Central Bank Digital Currency, also known as a CBDC. Now, a CBDC is a cashless form of currency. It's a digital currency created by the Federal Reserve. They're already in the talks about creating this. It would essentially eliminate all cash. Instead of you putting your money in the bank at, say, Wells Fargo or what have you, now all of a sudden you're banking directly with the Federal Reserve. And it's going to run on a blockchain, but it won't be decentralized like Bitcoin.
You're sort of already doing that with the basically allowing the banks are basically printing their own money right now. But this is all to accelerate. They're not really printing it, but they're adding zeros to their bankrolls and stuff like that. And this is all allowed in the fractional reserve banking system specifically to crash the system.
It will be on a centralized governmental blockchain. And then every transaction that you make, they will be able to tell what the carbon footprint of said product is, and they will be able to tell you yay or nay if you can buy it. So let's say, for example, you had a cookout this month, you had to go on a road trip, you had to go buy a plane ticket for something, and you're getting to the end of the month and you're like, man, I need some more ammo. And they're like, sorry, you've already used up too much of your personal carbon allowance. You're going to have to go add funds and buy carbon credits in order to buy this, or they could just tell you straight up no. Now, the way that this can be controlled is right now you can buy carbon credits as an EFT. They're just going to go up in value. And the reason they're going to skyrocket in value is big corporations are going to have to buy them to offset their carbon footprint. And because there's going to be such high demand from big corporations, an individual trying to purchase one will be astronomically priced.
Okay, and let's understand what happened during the lockdowns. Specifically, that they stripped small businesses of their ability to do business, that no man may buy or sell. And what happened? They were then locked up. But for some reason, you could go to the big box stores. You could go to Walmart, right? You could go to whatever big chain or grocery store that there was, and they were allowed to be open for reasons that don't exist. Actually, you're more likely to be exposed there than you would be in a small mom and pop store, because there's going to be more traffic at the big stores. But we're not in the business of sense making. We're in the business of following orders. And again, the society is completely fake.
I'm assuming, right? When all the mass shooting stuff started taking off, I was trying to find out, what are they distracting me from? And they do report these things in the news, but they don't really push it. It might be one little written news article. It might be a 1-minute video that.
All right, I'm going to jump ahead just a little bit, guys, because I wanted to watch this till the end. I know how I clipped it, but yeah, for the sake of time. Again, you guys weren't here in the beginning. It's probably going to be a long one. I'm probably going to stream for about 4 hours today, but the last bit of this will be not on YouTube. So be prepared to jump ship.
Has no talking in it and just puts, because, if you look at the 2030 agenda, they want net zero carbon emissions by 2030. One tiny example. Let's say I can now get I know we kind of went off on some tangents here towards and recessions. When you just align, seems therefore these companies are going to have to buy a ton of carbon credits in order to manufacture, which means a lot of gun companies would go out of business. And not only that, but a lot of them will have to increase price.
Okay, so in the end of this video, he's talking about what might result, how they'll get rid of guns, not directly through law, but by basically taxing the manufacturers of guns. But again, if you want to watch the whole video, go here to We're Not Ready for What's Coming and the Tactical Toolbox. I need to keep moving for the sake of time. So let me make sure I get my place. I don't want to skip over anything. Another video that you should check out potentially, and I was going to try and play it. I actually clipped it, but I don't have the time today, I don't think. Maybe we'll do it later. We'll look at it. But all these leftists that are outraged right now that are about to come after us. This is from Popo Medic, which is, he's got a really good channel, by the way. This was about an incident with the Crips in 1989. Again, harkening back to that time of high crime, right? Rodney King incident was in what, 92? Right after that, I remember that quite vividly. It was a big deal. But this was a neighborhood where these former Army Rangers, mind you, not really battle-hardened Army Rangers as far as I know, because this was in the late 80s, took on some Crips and basically had a whole war with them. And again, I wanted to just address it because you should probably watch it, but I do have a clip of it. We can watch the very beginning.
Saturday, September 23rd, 1989. An Army Ranger who had just purchased a home on one of Tacoma, Washington's most gang-infested streets quickly became a witness to various illegal activity happening out front of his home. He wasn't shy of confronting it or notifying the authorities, and soon after, he became the target of one of the most notorious street gangs Washington State has ever seen. And after shaking up the hornet's nest one too many times, his home was ambushed by the Hilltop Crips gang, but not before he invited 15 of his Ranger buddies over for a barbecue. 300 rounds, and 10 minutes later, the Crips were fighting for their lives.
So let me ask you, how do you think that went for the Crips? How do you think this is going to go for the leftists? Because there are a lot of us. I mean, I guess technically I have combat experience, but I don't actually have like the kind of experience that a lot of guys I know have. But how do you think that's going to work out with this generation of new vets that are war hardened? The left is completely delusional. They have no understanding of where they stand. And I am not delusional in understanding of where they stand as far as political power, but I mean actual power. And the thing that is keeping us, that is those of us who would want liberty and freedom from doing anything is like the Styx clip I played last week. The people on the right aren't willing. They aren't willing. They don't have the will to power to hurt people. And it's not that they won't hurt people directly. They don't want to have to. They don't want it. Anyone who's skilled in violence, who's not a psychopath, will tell you, you do not want it. Y'all think you do. You're a bunch of morons. You're lost in a false religion that guides you into psychopathy. And then you get, I guess you get woke up really quick when bad things happen to you. It's like the old moldy locks from some years ago getting knocked out. Anyways, what I wanted to talk about, it's going to feel a little bit off topic, but it's important to understand how we're psychopathologizing all these people, is this video that Jonathan Pajot did the other day. Now, this is from Jordan Peterson's channel. He reposted it. We're just going to look at the very beginning segment. I think I might use this later on because Jonathan talks about some very important things. These are deep metaphysical principles and understanding things. I want you to hear him out for like 15 or 20 minutes, and I will, of course, interject. I want you to hear him out so that you can fully understand the relationship of these dynamics, these group dynamics, of these cult dynamics, of these religious dynamics that are playing on in the background. And frankly, much like Jordan Peterson says quite often, and I do say it quite often, I don't care if you're an atheist, you're religious. I promise you, you are operating on a religion. We are, by our very nature, meant to be religious. It is part of how we are in the image of God and how we are imagers of God. So if you don't have that direct relationship with God for some manner or another, that is, you will be acting out some sort of religious faith. Again, it could be atheism. And I love it when atheists go, well, how can the belief and not having a belief be a faith? You have a belief, therefore you have a faith. It's kind of like, and then they go, well, no, it's not the belief in anything. It's the absence of a belief. The absence of a belief is still a belief. The absence of a belief of a certain thing is a belief about that certain thing. It's like when people say, don't judge me. Don't judge me. Well, you moron, you just made a judgment. Right? You made a judgment by saying that I judged you. Yeah. Or the most sinful and evil of them all. Oh, there is no morality. All morality is relative. There is no truth. Truth is relative. Well, those are both moral and truthful statements. You cannot square your circle. You cannot escape those paradoxes. In any case, let's get into it. And then after this, guys, we will talk about the left's psychosis on Roe and all of those things.
Throughout all of this, as Pajot says, symbolism happens. So today it is my great pleasure to introduce him, and I'm hoping that he will lay out a roadmap to the symbolism which is happening today and which maybe is gathering for the near future.
Well, hello, everybody. Thank you for inviting me. This is really a wonderful opportunity. I'm surprised to see some people that I know I'm kind of looking at the mosaic here of everybody. Well, not everybody, but some people. So I'm surprised to see some people that I know and then some people that I kind of symbolic trip. I want to present to you, first of all, let's say the source of the symbolism that I tried to present, the frame, you could say, of the symbolism. I'm going to present it maybe in a little more of a technical way that I usually do, in the more kind of colloquial way that I do on YouTube. So hopefully that'll be okay. And then what I'll do is I'll take you on an example of this symbolic pattern, a very basic example, which is we're going to read the first chapter of Genesis together, and we're going to try to look at how it kind of manifests the symbolic pattern and how this becomes a kind of map that you can use to interpret the world, but also a map, especially a map that you can use to inhabit your life.
So we are not going to look at that part. We're going to get into what he's presenting here, and we're going to apply it to those of us who would be living in the way of life versus those who are living in the way of death.
And so we'll see that symbolism is not only about interpretation. I mean, as Jungians, you know that it's a way to be and a way to kind of inhabit the world. And so there's an interesting moment right now, I think, in the zeitgeist, in the culture, something like the end of materialism or the end of physicalism. We saw, of course, I think that Jordan Peterson has played a big role in poking at this, kind of poking at the new atheist, this last weird new atheist moment that we had in the early 2000s. And so what we're seeing is kind of materialism running to its end. And it's happening in physics with the problem of the observer. It's happening in things like just.
Now, I've mentioned this before, the problem of the observer. This is an issue in quantum physics where the observation of matter, of particles, actually changes the behavior of particles. And that, as Pageau is going to explain eventually here, is a direct, I don't think he quite makes the direct correlation, but I'm telling you it's what it is. I I listened to this whole thing. It's like an hour and a half long. We're going to listen to, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes of it or something. But the observation of something and the fact that it changes because we observe it, if that is indeed a fact, is a direct relationship to how the world unfolds before us and how we understand it. And it points to a bigger purpose and meaning in the world and an understanding and recognition of pattern. And of course, Pageau will get into this. I'll let him speak and we'll elaborate.
This notion of complexity or complexity theory, the problem of emergence, all of these things are bringing materialism to its end. And the way that I like to understand it is that for a while, we had this kind of weird duality of mind and body or mind and matter, where we kind of abstracted the mind into this place that we didn't talk about. And then we look at the world and we interpret reality. And as materialism kind of ran its course, as this kind of scientism ran its course, at some point, you could say there is something of a little moment, a surprising moment of pride where as we're kind of exhausting the things that we study, people realize that, well, there's this one thing that we haven't studied. It's the thing that's looking at everything else. Like we're studying the world, but all of a sudden we realize that there's a viewer that's doing that studying. And as soon as the materialist eye, you could say, turned towards the viewer, turned towards the interpreter, turned towards trying to understand consciousness, trying to understand meaning itself, then things become very loopy. And the simplicity of the dualistic model stops to make sense. And this happens very much in terms of evolutionary thinking. What evolutionary thinking did in some parts is try to explain the motivations of humans. And when you start to do that, you have a problem because this human who's talking about evolution is what you're trying to interpret. And so you're actually interpreting the interpreter. And so what has happened is that it's opened the door to all kinds of questions, the problem of emergence, the problem of quality. And one of the big things that's happened is the problem of attention. And this has been manifesting itself in different fields. And it's realizing that the world is too complex, that the world actually is kind of indefinite in its complexity. Everything you look at, everything you encounter has an indefinite amount of complexity. And it's made of parts, and those parts also have an indefinite amount of complexity. And you can just scale that down, to the quantity.
Okay, so we know this from fractals. Okay, everything in the universe operates on basically a fractal system. And there's this infinite complexity that goes down to the bottom level of all things. And we know this from breaking down things to the atom. The atom is supposed to be the most simple particle, but then we get inside the atom, there are electrons, neutrons, and all that stuff, and protons. And we get inside the core, the nucleus of the atom, and what do we get? well, we get these things that are called quarks and so on down the line. Because this is the complexity in which God has made the world, at least in my belief. And it seems very simple because the world's very mathematics, very logical in a lot of ways. I love it when the cosmologists try to say that everything's chaotic. And I'm like, that is absolutely absurd. We actually have seasons, right? Based on the movements of the planets and its relationship, our relationship to the sun. That's not chaotic. That's a symphony.
Quantum field or whatever. And many thinkers realize, how does this work? How do things scale up between different levels of phenomena? That is, how is it that I can...
The important part there, Dahari, is theory. And the sophist and scientismists will tell you that, oh, a theory is higher than, just a hypothesis. Well, yes, of course. It doesn't mean that it's true. And we operate on fake science all the time. 90% of our science operates on theory, not fact, not laws. Yes. And larger parts, anti-commie, it goes both ways. It is not in the occultic perception of things, but in the perception of as above, so below in the Christian mindset, which is different. It's not a complete and full reflection, but I'm not going to get into that here today. What I will say, though, is as above, so below is the same thing as the Old and the New Testament, and everything points to the center, which is Christ. And for mankind, we are at that pinnacle in the middle, which is, again, Christ, or we're supposed to be. And if we are in him, we are representing him. It's the reflection of the heavens and God's will here on earth in us, on this earth, on this lower plane. Dahari says, yeah, I get it. DeGrasse, yeah. Well, he's a sophist, dude. He's not a scientist. I mean, the stuff he says, he's not the only one, though. I used to really like Carl Sagan when I was younger, because he is a smart guy. He's got a lot of smart things to say, but there are other things I'm just like, oh man. It's like Dawkins. Dawkins flat out makes illogical arguments and bases his entire new atheist religion upon sophistry and not really getting to the heart of things.
Look at a chair and see that the chair is both one thing, it's a chair, but it also is many things, and those many things are also many things. But I can perceive at every level of reality that there's unity. So I can notice a leg of a chair, and I can notice the color of the chair, but I can also see that all of this participates in the being of the chair. And this is like a hard problem. It's a difficult problem, because it ends up infecting all of meaning making, and it infects science, and it's not an infection. It's actually a kind of healing, I think. But it kind of seeps back into science and seeps back into
So before he goes on, this is part of Aristotelianism and the categorization of things, and the postmodernists, the modern philosophical religious viewpoint of the left is that things must be deconstructed. Now, I don't blame the postmodernists for saying that we can look at the deconstruction of things. That's always been around. But what they have done is basically made a world that is completely senseless by completely deconstructing it. And then others have used their thoughts on these things as tools to manipulate people. But greater than what the postmodernists done, because it depends on who you're talking about. Most of them were all Marxists. So there was an intention in what they were doing. And of course, they are the successors of the Frankfurt School. And again, I'm not going to go into all that, but you can look that up, and many of you probably already know what that is about.
Into the very way in which we understand the world. And we realize that we have difficulty accounting for the qualities of things using descriptive means, that we have difficulty even accounting for the identity of things using descriptive means. So once we have the identity, we can describe things, but the identity seems to kind of emerge from somewhere else or come from somewhere else and kind of brings multiplicity into unity. And so what's fascinating is that it has, like I said, it has opened up all of a sudden the possibility for people to kind of to understand ancient thinking in a way that until recently was very difficult to understand. And so if we understand, so we realize that the world has to be patterned, that there has to be patterns in the world. And this is more than just a psychological reality. It's not just about describing the psyche of the human person. It's actually a cosmological argument. It's an argument about how reality works, which is that for things to exist, they have to be patterned.
And in order for patterns to be recognized, there has to be intelligence.
Those patterns seem to stack up at different levels of reality, and also seem to exist in smaller patterns, seems to exist in bigger patterns, right? I mean, you can think about it physically or think about it any way you want. And this actually seems to be something which is inevitable for us to be able to even encounter the world. Now, what it means is that it brings back the idea of intelligence, the idea of consciousness, and it can reconnect us to how the ancients talked about it.
There's a lot of them. Stephen Mayer's one. He's not a creationist, but a intelligent design. Michael Behe is one. There's a couple of them out there. But that's off the top of my head who I can name for you. Dahari. I know who I'm talking to.
Some people are talking about something like the revenge of Aristotle, right? Or the revenge of Plato, because suddenly when we have to re-enter our experience and try to analyze our experience, we realize that, oh, actually, when Aristotle talked about potentiality and actuality, I experience that every single day of my life, right? I actually encounter the field that presents itself to me as potential, which is brought into patterns, brought into actualities that I need in order to be able to exist, right? And those actualities, those patterns, they're not just mathematical patterns or ideas in the vague Platonic sense that people have, but they're actually teleological. They're purposes, right? And these purposes, they can be regained from evolutionary thinking, which is just the strangest thing in the world. Like, who would have thought that Darwin would bring Plato back? But when we re-enter evolutionary thinking, we realize that we need purposes in order to encounter the world. So it's like this cup, the fact that I recognize it as a cup is because I recognize its purpose to me as a human being. And that actually scales the hierarchy of purposes, even in terms of science, right? People think that science is just a study of phenomena, but we always forget that science is embedded into social systems. And that, for example, the science that will get the most attention will always be the science that is the most fascinating or useful for humans. And the science that will get the least attention, which means the least money, the least effort to study, will be the things that are the least useful for humans. So as soon as you re-embed science into its actual social frame, then all of a sudden, this hierarchy just reappears again, this ancient hierarchy, which is basically, you could call it something like the religious hierarchy. So what it does is that these patterns, these teleological patterns, these patterns with purpose, come back into the way in which we actually exist in the world. So you can understand that ritual suddenly makes sense again.
Now, that might not make sense to you, but ritual is a patternistic acting out of these purposes, these things. And as he is going to explain, ritual is part of our everyday life in the simplest things that we do and our interactions in our society. And there are ritualistic ways in which we must interact. And when we don't interact that way, it creates a problem in the matrix, right? It creates a ripple. People see it. They catch on to it. Now, I highly advise you to find this, go watch the whole thing. There's a great portion after this part that I cut where he talks about the creation narrative in Genesis, and he is absolutely 100% correct on all of the things that he says about the creation narrative. And I think I might talk about this on Thursday. I'm not sure. But because there is a deeper meaning in those stories. And you might say, oh, as Sam Harris did with Jordan Peterson, oh, you're just pulling this out of nowhere. No, we're not. The reason why we're not is because this has been accepted and known for millennia. There are deeper meaning to things. The occult knows these things. These things kind of go hand in hand because the occult has a very similar metaphysic to the Christian metaphysic. The difference is that the occult is a corrupted one and the Christian is not. In fact, that might be part of the thing that I talk about because I can show you, I know the origins of these things. We know what the origins of these things are. We know where they come from. We know the history. We know the people. There is a period of time where we maybe don't know about these religions and certain faiths or whatever that we're about, but we know as far as civilization starting, where the origins come from. And you can see the inversion of the stories. You can see one is the way of death and enslavement, and one is the way of life and to prosperity, the way to paradise. And a little secret here, guys. A big difference is pride's a very important part, but a big difference in all of this is the worship of truth versus the worship of knowledge and intellect. Knowledge and intellect is important, but only when applied to finding the truth. And in the truth comes love. There is no love and just knowledge for knowledge's sake, or intellect for intellect's sake. And that's where you find the technocrat. That's where you find the pride. And that's where you find the psychopathologizing.
Not only does it make sense, but it's actually inevitable. And you can see everything you do through ritual. Because everything you do in the world is patterned teleologically. It's patterned towards purpose. And sometimes, let's say, there are moments in which that purpose will kind of break down. But that is also part of the, let's say, great ritual, which usually involves something like carnival, which involves aspects of chaos on the edges of these patterns. And so you realize that, like, drinking a cup of water is necessarily ritualized. It has to be teleological and it has to have a certain form. I have to do certain things in a certain order in order for me to be able to achieve the purpose that I'm reaching with my cup. Now bring this into the human sphere. It's the same. And when I encounter someone, my encounter necessarily has to be ritualized. And you can realize that it has to be ritualized because if you try to do the opposite of the ritual, you're going to get some funny reactions, right? Try to talk to the back of someone's head, for example, for a while, or just lay down on the middle of the ground while you're speaking to someone. And you'll realize that human relationships are extremely ritualized, right? We speak and we feel the tension, right? So it's really like a rubber band. You speak, and then you have to stop speaking, and you have to listen. And so there's this kind of wave, this back and forth wave, this call and response, you could call it, that happens in a conversation, that if you don't follow that pattern, you're going to break the relationship and no one's going to want to talk to you anymore.
So again, in what he's talking about, what he's pointing to is a person who's overly domineering in a conversation, a person who rejects your ideas. And there's one thing, if someone goes, oh, I don't think that that's right, and they're, being judicious about it. But there's another thing when the person's always shutting you down, always cutting you down, always pushing you lower, right? Because as I talked about last week, you can tell who a psychopath is, or who someone who has like a cluster B personality disorder, someone who's misaligned, I would say, spiritually, when they need to elevate themselves by oppressing you. Because any good relationship is always going to bring both people up. They're going to come up together. And that's how we can tell, very simply, that our government is evil, because it's not about bringing everyone up. It's about propping up those who they wish to prop up and putting everyone else down.
Everybody knows someone like that, and everybody sometimes has fallen into that excess where they've talked too much and they realize it, or they haven't talked enough. They just listened and didn't give their opinion, and the other person feels like you weren't there. So we can see that this is how it works. Now, you can scale this pattern up from simple human interactions, from simple human engagement with objects, into social interactions as well. That is, we realize that in order to have teleology, in order to have purpose, and in order for a group to have purpose, it has to encounter itself ritually. It has to have things which bind it together, which make the group recognize that it is together. Because this is the problem of multiplicity, and the problem of complexity happens especially in terms of human interactions. What's the difference between a group and a crowd? What's the difference between a team and a crowd, right? There are a bunch of people that are together, but one of them is not bound teleologically and the other is, right? A team is bound teleologically. Let's say a soccer team. They are bound towards a purpose. They're bound towards a common identity. And that common identity will manifest itself in ritual. And those rituals include the rules of the game, the rules of engagement. Those rituals also includes other things which are more related to identity. And this is something which will bring us straight into religious ritual.
So there, the final thing he was saying was bringing us to religious ritual. Let me replay that.
Will manifest itself in ritual. And those rituals include the rules of the game, the rules of engagement. Those rituals also includes other things which are more related to identity. And this is something which will bring us straight into religious ritual.
Now, there's a lot more he says that's very important after that. But bringing us into religious ritual is the point here, because the religious ritual of the left is to yell and scream and cry and burn things down and threaten violence when they don't get their way. That is their religion. They are the religion of death. They are a death cult. They do believe that being basically non-reproductive and getting rid of people on the earth is ideal. I mean, they say it all the time. They're open about it, yet many people will not listen, will not believe them, will put it aside. They'll say, hey, no, that's not really what they mean. No, it is. It is. It's just that you're not a developed person. You're not thinking. You're not delving into the deeper meaning and potentials of these things. And maybe you're just not smart enough to do so. I don't know. But regardless, you are participating in a religion. And I can tell you, it's not a good one. It's not a good one for your soul. And I don't mean that because if you believe in God or not any of those things. I mean, it's not a good one for your soul because, well, frankly, folks, it is, it's a lot of people that are really, really bad people doing these things. Like, I mean, the kind of the worst people, right? So with that, I got from the Jolly Professor, old Professor Dutton here. And it says, why are 25% of students suddenly LGBT? So it's a good question. Let's watch a little bit of this video.
Hello, 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 and welcome to this edition of the Jolly Heretic. Now, today I would like to talk about the dramatic rise in LGBT identity among the young people, and why this dramatic rise is happening. And it's certainly not happening because more people are becoming homosexual. They're not becoming homosexual. It is not the case that more people are becoming homosexual. It is the case that more people are identifying as homosexual. And this particularly strongly correlates with being left-wing. So it's not real, it's disingenuous, it's fake. And I want to look at why it is happening. Now, this was inspired by a very interesting study that has
Interesting how you use those words, right? I just saw this today, by the way. I just saw this today. It fit perfectly because I was going to talk about the dark triad, which we're going to address here in a bit, but I thought I would lead in with this clip. So, yeah.
Even published, called Born This Way, The Rise of LGBT as a Social and Political Identity by Eric Kaufman. The data is startling at first until you think about it, and then it makes a great deal of sense. Basically, as I've discussed before on this channel, people being left-wing correlates with being very, very mentally ill, being very, very strong in the personality trait known as neuroticism.
Okay, so we've talked about the big five numerous times on this channel, at least in the past. You should have some basic working understanding of this, right? Of personality traits, how people are. It'll actually help you navigate the world a lot better. It'll help you be more sympathetic, I believe. But the people that are highest in neuroticism are leftist men and women in general, and then leftist women. This is a sign. Neuroticism specifically, people don't like the terminology because it connotes something, that there's something wrong with them. But what it really is, it's a sign that they are unstable, that they are worried and fearful, that they don't have peace in their lives. And I mean, it's like cluster B people. You actually kind of have to feel sorry for them because they're actually suffering all the time. The problem is they never seek to get help with it or to cope with it in any sort of way that is going to build them up stronger and make their character solid steel. No, instead, what they must do is bring everyone low to their level because they're weak. They're freaking weak. That's the bottom line. They are weak people, so they must use authority. They must use the gun to force you into their weakness. They're jealous of your strength.
If you are strong in neuroticism, then you feel lots and lots of negative feelings strongly, firstly. And secondly, being strong in neuroticism is a reflection of being generally an individualist, being adapted to a fast life history strategy in which you live fast and die young and don't have to learn to cooperate with people, and thus mental instability and so on.
And that you can find about gang violence in the book Killing the Competition, which is all about that. They do live fast and die young. And the same people live in these democratic established cities, right?
Is not selected out. And so people that are individualists, of course, they are selfish and they want to attain power. They're not interested in cooperating for the greater good of the group. Therefore, individualists will be constantly wanting to strive for power, strive for control, and so on. And
now, I want to make a note here too. Professor Dutton is using the word individualist. We like that word here in America. He means it in the extreme sense, being almost anti-social, the point where you don't care about other people's feelings. Literally psychopathy. That's what an extreme individualist is. It's psychopathy. And I'm going to show you, we're going to look at clips of psychopaths here right after this, after we talk about the dark triad, because it's imperative you recognize these people and their behavior, because most of you probably don't have the background that I have, where I've experienced a lot of it. And I don't even mean personally, I mean professionally. And so you're not going to be able to recognize it. And for the most part, even I, because I'm not a clinician trying to examine people all the time or whatever, I don't recognize it in people until I get to know them later on. And there's a very specific example of somebody I recently think that I've known for several months now, but I recently came to the conclusion I think that they have a bit of psychopathy, and it all has to do with a disregard for everyone else and their lack of ability to empathize with everyone else.
They will be obsessed with equality and harm avoidance, because equality will bring people down so that they have proportionately more, and harm avoidance means that they don't have to suffer harm for the good of the group. So for these reasons then, neuroticism is, these are of course left-wing ideas. People that are left-wing are obsessed with equality and harm avoidance. So for these reasons, neuroticism is associated with being left-wing. Neuroticism, it means you're high in things like jealousy and resentment. These are some of the negative feelings involved. If you're high in these things, then of course you will, this resentment will mean that you will want a more equal society, and so on, because you will want proportionately more, and you will hate those that have power. Secondly, if you're neurotic, then you'll be very, very low in trust and very paranoid. You'll want control over people and everything they do, and this militates in favour of a left-wing society where there is a high degree of control. Another reason for it is that one way of coping with strongly negative feelings and with feeling that you're useless and you're ghastly and whatever is to create a false self in which you believe that you are good and you are perfect and you are.
This is the persona I speak of. The false self is the persona. The persona is built up around the society as well and what they preach. Professor Dutton's about to address that.
Morally superior to everybody else, and that's how you cope. Now, of course, you don't feel it, really. You don't really feel like that, but so you can be sort of triggered when someone confronts you with evidence that the way of thinking that you are propounding in order to convince others of this false self, i.e. leftism, is wrong, and this will confront you with the fact that you are false and you are disingenuous, and therefore with your real self, which will be crippling for you, and so you will react with a great deal of violence.
And you can see that disingenuousness when they are them real. They're like when you get a glimpse of their real selves, you see it all the time. And you see it in hypocrisy, how they fake things and act and then turn around and do the exact opposite.
Violence to them. But so therefore people that are left-wing, it has been shown, are high in narcissism, because that's what narcissism involves, creating a false, perfect self, certainly vulnerable narcissism. So for all these reasons, you can see why being left-wing, because it's individualist, involves identifying with groups that are other than your family and your immediate genetic interests. Identifying with outsiders, and collaborating with outsiders, of course, allows you to attain individual power. And it's been shown that people that are left-wing, therefore, are high in neuroticism, but also low in agreeableness, that is cooperativeness, group-oriented values, and low in conscientiousness, that is impulse control and rule following. So you can see why there is a relationship between being left-wing and being mentally ill. But there is in turn a relationship between left-wing and being LGBT, and I want to look at this and why this is the case. Now, according to Born This Way, among those under in general, about 2 to 4% of the population identify as LGBT. Among those under the age of 30 in America, it is 20% of the population. In the UK, between those aged 16 and 24, it is 7.6% of the population, and that's the low end. But the very fact that there is this disparity is telling you that there's something social going on. It's also very quick. This isn't some sort of genetic change.
So you're right, Dahari. It's covert narcissism, but again, as Professor Dutton's going on here, these are traits of the dark triad, and we're going to look at it briefly in text, and then I'm going to show you some other stuff, and then we're going to move specifically in the Roe v. Wade and why these people are acting this way, and how they're actually degenerate. They're evil, and I'm not going to play around with mince my words about it. They're evil, and they might not act out their evil on a regular basis, but they are self-pitying, loathing, hateful, spiteful, evil people who would proclaim to do things. And I have yet to call for anyone's death or the murder or extermination of anybody, but they constantly do, and then project that onto us. I'm going to show you a video of a woman. It's a random video. Don't get me wrong. It's not all women who are pro-abortion, pro-murdering babies. But here is a person in this video later that I will show you that is completely like synthesized, completely delusional, completely psychopathic.
largest identity among LGBT is bisexual, and this was particularly the case for women. Now, this is interesting because women are more bisexual than men. It's been found that the heritability of sexuality is about 0.4 in men, and
So that's about 40%, because that's if someone says 0.4 or whatever, it's usually on a scale of 1. So about 40% is heritable. Did you catch that though? The 60 other percent is environmental. It's different with women. Women are more likely to be bisexual, and he's going to explain this briefly.
About 0.2 in women. So the environmental component is much higher in women. And this is because it's been argued in prehistory, women are evolved to live in basically harems. And so when they are lowered down the harem because a new fitter wife comes along, then they tend to bond strongly with other women who will...
I don't think it has anything to do with harems. I think it has to do with the ancient systems of strength and power. The will to power, that is. If I'm going to be a ruler and a warlord, we'll take Genghis Khan, for example. Or, earlier I talked about King Solomon. Solomon married all these women around him and these pagan religions and took them as wives and had hundreds of concubines. He did this for political power and control. Quite narcissistic and Machiavellian, right? Genghis Khan, who conquered all of the East and basically is the father of about half of all Asia, he did similarly the same thing. Now, on a lower scale, you would think about it. If you were in a tribe, men would probably more likely than not have so many women. But if you wanted to become a king, then you would, right? You would have a ton of women. And all of these things, as far as the metaphysics or the ancient beliefs from either straight Mesopotamian scripture, texts, I should say, won't call it scripture, but like the Sumerian text, right? And what happened, or the biblical from the Judeo-Christian tradition, is the idea that men became kings and took power, and it was not something that God set forth before them, and that in part they were emulating the gods, the lower gods, what we would call spirits or the princes and principalities of the age, who were also the fallen angels, right? The fallen watchers. All of this ties back. Now, the Sumerian believed that mankind was made from clay, from the earth, just like the Bible, to be slaves. I'm sure if those beings of interdimensional power really do exist, that they would have made the human beings their slaves. And the reason why for this in the biblical narrative is because us as human beings, being able to be imagers of God and being in the likeness of God himself, we're actually higher than the angels, but we gave our authority over to them in the Garden of Eden. So again, that's that metaphysic. That is that explicit tradition of Christianity. And much of that has changed over the years. There are different perspectives, whatever else, but that is where it comes from. And in fact, Sin, the moon god, now I don't believe that words are related in English or whatever, but Sin, the moon god of that period, is where Abram, or who Abram was probably worshiping. And that is the area, those people that were worshiping that supposed God, where Abram came from before he became Abraham, the father of many nations, before the one God of the universe spoke to him.
Parent their children for them, and these relationships can often become sexual in nature to create a stronger bond. So bisexual, particularly among women. However, there is a clear disparity between sexual behavior and sexual identification. So according to the research, currently 96% of people claim that they've only had a heterosexual relationship. So 4% claim that this is in the 1990s. 4% claimed that they'd had homosexual relationships of any kind. Now this is 92%. So the change has not been substantial, and this is driven mainly by women engaging in sexual experimentation and so on, which they wouldn't previously have done because it was more socially unacceptable to do so. The relationship, however, between behavior and identity started to diverge in about 2008. So since 2008 and
Imagine that, around 2008. What was going on then? Well, there was Barack Obama's presidency and a big leftward push. And also the internet was coming up with social media. At the same time, with social media, with certain accounts, MySpace, whatever else, not that powerful. Eventually, Facebook come along. But at the same time, then there was this rehashing of this oppression narrative and this thing of racial relationships being wrong and whatever. Right after everyone thought that all of that was done because we just elected a black president. And of course, a lot of this then is the shifting or the covert nature of how the PC movement in the early 90s went underground into academia to slowly subvert it for it only to pop its head up about 10, 15 years later. And we get what we have today. And again, part of this is also the millennial generation and the way they were raised versus the generations before that. There are so many factors involved with this, but the simplest, most important factor I think that I will continue to harp on is that we live in a synthetic society that is meant to synthesize you into being a revolutionary Marxist or some sort of fascist or whatever it is, whatever the powers that be want. And it takes you away from your actual identity and your true self. And therefore you put on a persona, a fake self to present to the world. And for, let's just talk about from an evolutionary perspective, for your own gains in this disjointed world, you then begin to accept and take on the narratives being pushed upon you, the same narratives that say that you are a special little snowflake and no one can offend you. And now you have a weapon to cudgel people with. It's all about power, folks. And that's why they adopt postmodernism, because that's what the postmodernists believe. They know that we're not about power on the right, on the liberty side. We're about doing things correctly. We're about our identity and history. We're about tradition. We're about stability. They don't care for any of that. They only care about unmitigated power. And that is the part of that dark triad, right? The Machiavellianism. And as Professor Dutton would say here, the extreme individualistic nature of them.
2021.
And I know that seems like a paradox too, because they're collectivist. They're collectivist only in so much that they can hide within the collective for their individual gain.
There has been an 11% increase in identifying as LGBT, and it is particularly strong among those under the age of 30. Now, the big predictor of doing this, of identifying in this way, is political. It is being liberal. It is being left-wing.
So not classical liberal, modern liberal, libertine. Libertine. I want people to start using that word because that's what it is. It's a libertinism. It's left libertinism.
To the extent that we can talk about an LGBT liberal factor. And this also seems to cross over with neuroticism, with being mentally unstable, with social anxiety, all of that sort of thing. So among people that are very liberal, 33% of people between 2016 and 2021, 33% of people identified as LGBT. It's 50% among certain kinds of students that identify as LGBT. 50% of certain kinds of 25% of students in America identify as LGBT, but it is 50% of students in sort of woke sort of subjects, sort of left wing sort of subjects. And then among humanities colleges, doing a humanities subject, people are 10 points more likely than those doing a science subject, a STEM subject, to identify as LGBT. As I say, 50% of those doing gender studies, 27% of those doing 25% of students in general, but it becomes much higher among these sort of more left-wing subjects. And if you look particularly at liberal arts colleges, 38% of the students identify as LGBT. So what is going on?
Well, he's about ready to explain what's going on. I pretty much already have, but regardless, I'm going to let the dear professor, talk. Understand, though, this isn't happening in the hard sciences. It's happening in the pseudosciences. That's not to say that social sciences don't have hard science within them, but the human factor makes it difficult to make strong predictions. And what we have to we understand certain things for sure. Like the Gini coefficient is 100% a thing. And it just does not apply to economic, like monetary things. It applies to the women and men, and basically how many men in a society can be disenfranchised from women. So if that gets over 0.4, there's violence, which is why we have the term and social circles as enforced monogamy. It's just the practice of a standard of marriage and not polygamy, which again, I sort of addressed earlier. That polygamy is more toward a powerful warlordish type person. And I don't know. I mean, I know there are some Mormons out there that still do it on the down low and whatever else. I know it's still accepted in the Muslim world. I have lots of women in my life, but I have 3 very important women in my life. My wife, my oldest daughter, and my baby. Now, my baby girl, she's a baby, so it's a little bit different, but I could use more balance in my life with the testosterone is all I'm saying. I don't know how these guys put up with having multiple people as partners, but that's a lot of what he was talking about too. There, you get the sister wife thing where they help each other out and they help the family out. Becomes a different kind of thing. And I guess if it works, it works. But I'm going to stick with God's one man, one woman principle, because that is the balance, right? That is the yin and the yang. That is the balance between both, and we both build each other up together. And then we have our anima, right? Going back to Jungian psychology, the anima and the animus, which is that dot that accentuates our polar opposite of our sexuality. So I'm a man. I'm maybe not the most masculine of men, but I'm pretty certain I'm a pretty high testosterone guy, even though I'm like not a very big guy, right? But I'm also a thinker and an artist. So I have some, especially the artistic side, a more feminine approach to things, right? It's more chaotic in the classical way of looking at the metaphysic. Chaos and order. Males are order, females are chaos. And this isn't disparaging women. It's obvious. Men are more logical, women are more emotional, and there must be a balance in those things, because pure logic is purely utilitarian and evil, and pure emotion is pure passion and evil. They must be regulated properly together.
Well, I looked earlier at the relationship between liberalism and mental instability. That's clear. That's there, obviously, and we know why. But one of the things that is, of course, associated with being liberal is with being mentally unstable and with being liberal is Machiavellianism. Why is this the case? Well, as I said, they're individualists. They want power, and so therefore they're Machiavellian. So if you are Machiavellian, but you're also mentally unstable, so you fear lots of things and you fear conflict and all this sort of thing, then
Remember, folks, what I talked about with fear earlier in the show. If you were here, if not, go back and watch. Fear is how they control you. Fear is less abstract than death, and what they make you fear is the perception of some sort of pain, whether it be emotional or physical. You know, it is the application of pain to your life. It might just be economic pain, but one way or another, it is meant to put you in a state of fear so that you give up your God-given right to autonomy, to freedom.
how can you attain power? And the answer is through covert signaling. You don't overtly play for power like someone like Donald Trump. In fact, you recoil from that precisely because you can't bring yourself to do it. You covertly do it. You signal. You virtue signal. That's one way, and that's been found to be associated with narcissism and Machiavellianism.
Aiden Paladin, our friend, did an entire video on this last year, 2 years ago, something like that. Really good. I used parts of it, portions of it, and talked about it in some of my earlier videos before I started live streaming all the time. I was just doing pre-recorded stuff. So go look into that. Look into these things if you're not aware of them. It's how it works.
But also you victim signal. And this is again associated with liberalism, with Machiavellianism, with vulnerable narcissism. You victim signal. And if you victim signal, you signal that then it's a way of signaling that people will be sympathetic to you and give you power. And the other thing you do is you realize, and this is why intelligence is relevant, I think, you realize that you must imbibe the current worldview, and in order to force yourself to accept it, and in order to attain power, be a little bit more in that worldview than the next
guy. So I guess I didn't quite cut that well, but be more in that worldview than the next guy, because the more virtuous you seem to be in that worldview, the more you're propping that up, the more you're the superstar. You understand how the narcissism works there, right? Now, I titled this channel All-1 because there were multiple reasons, but I was a fan of Jonathan Haidt's work, and he republished with pictures, really good art actually, and it was abridged, John Stuart Mill's portion of On Liberty, where he goes on about free speech. If all mankind -1 were to believe in something, that doesn't make that one person wrong, is essentially how the argument goes. But bigger than that, it's kind of how I started, and whatever. Bigger than that was, I don't care if the rest of the world is against me. I'm going to stand my ground and where I am at and what I believe and what I know. And I'm not going to be coerced. And you shouldn't be either. I'm not here. I might say things like, believe me, trust me, yada, yada, yada. But in the end, don't believe me. Don't trust me. Question and look into it. But I can promise you what I'm saying is truthful. Regardless, anyone can say such words. And therefore, you cannot just take it at face value. You do need to examine it for yourself. You must, I believe, as a human being, do such a thing. That's part of the search for truth. That is part of the knocking and asking and seeking that Christ demands of us. But as we saw that, let's talk about the dark triad, and we're going to listen to some psychopaths and hear what they have to say about their psychopathy. And these aren't malevolent psychopaths. These are just regular people who don't have empathy. But let's look into the dark triad real quick, just as a refresher. I'm viewing 1 of 3 free articles. Okay. I could just archive you too, Anyways. Excuse me. Gonna go through, a couple different, like 3 different sites real quick, right? Got this mindtools.com. We got Wikipedia, and then of course we have Psychology Today, and that way you can get a kind of rounded perspective. These aren't, deep, dark Google searches or anything. These are like first page hits. But you'll get some understanding right here. Some people have personality traits that can make it difficult to deal with them, and they may be volatile, arrogant, and domineering. But with careful management, you can develop their strengths, neutralize their challenges, eliminate their behavior, and restore team harmony. No, these people, if they don't recognize it, you have to cut them out and get rid of them. No one will make anyone ever change. Ever. Unless it's through fear and the force of violence, right? People don't change. And through fear and the force of violence, a lot of times people are just holding their tongue and biting it, waiting to find a chance to flee. Or they're completely broken. And they'll never free because they're endeared to their captors. But if you're in a work environment and someone is exuding psychopathic, dark triad type behaviors, you're best just to cut them. It's my advice, at least. But some other behaviors and characteristics can be seriously damaging, and if someone displays a toxic combination of these traits, they can undermine their colleagues in a lasting way and can potentially poison and destroy a team. Yes. Psychologists have identified 3 traits that make up the sinister sounding dark triad: narcissism, Machiavellism, and psychopathy. In this article, we will explore the 3 traits of the dark triad, identify the behaviors associated with each of them, and look at how they might impact the workplace. So, what is the dark triad? Narcissism comes from the Greek myth of Narcissus, a hunter who fell in love with his own reflection in a pool of water and drowned. Narcissistic people can be selfish, boastful, arrogant, lacking in empathy, and hypersensitive to criticism. They cannot, I don't know why they use can be. They are. They are. You will know a narcissist when you meet a narcissist. Machiavellianism is a little bit different because they're more diplomatic, right? The word comes from the renowned 16th century Italian politician and diplomat Niccolo Machiavelli. He earned notoriety when his 1513 book, The Prince, was interpreted as an endorsement of dark arts of cunning and deceit in diplomacy. Traits associated with Machiavellism include duplicitous, excuse me, guys, I had a burp out of nowhere, duplicity, manipulation, self-interest, and a lack of both emotion and morality. I like that they make the note here because Machiavelli was not endorsing any of these things. He was saying this is how it gets done. That's all he was doing. He's making an observation more than anything. But yes, so duplicity is hypocrisy, or saying something and then doing something different. Rules for thee, not for me. It's not quite the same as hypocrisy, right? Because hypocrisy literally means you're acting, you're pretending. Manipulation, we all know what that is, right? Self-interest and a lack of both emotion and morality. Psychopathy, personality traits associated with psychopathy include a lack of empathy or remorse, antisocial behavior, and being manipulative and volatile. It's important to note that there are distinctions between psychopathic traits and being a psychopath, which is commonly how it is associated with criminal and violence. Actually, that is incorrect. That is incorrect. If you have psychopathy, you have psychopathy. But they don't have any regard for their own lives, let alone others. So they might not be malevolent people. They're not trying to hurt people, but they do manipulate and do things to their advantage. But they don't really understand how they're affecting people. And what happens with all these type of people, the dark triads, the cluster B people, is that they cut folks out of their lives. And I don't mean that they do it purposely. I mean, people are like, screw you, I'm out of here. You're toxic. As they should. How to identify dark triad traits? So Jensen and Webster measures ask people to rate themselves against 3 questions. I tend to manipulate others to get my way. I use deceit or lied to get my way. I have used flattery to get my way. I tend to exploit others towards my own ends. I tend to lack remorse. I tend not to be too concerned with morality or the morality of my actions. I tend to be callous or insensitive. I tend to be cynical. I tend to want others to admire me. I tend to want others to pay attention to me. I tend to seek prestige or status. I tend to expect special favors from others. Interesting. It's almost like that whole speech of the light bearer saying, I will be like the Most High. I will be worshipped. I will be this. I will be that. They will bow to me. Yeah. Because that's where it comes from. It's the same spirit, folks. At its basic level, an individual would be rated from, for example, 1 to 7 on each of the 12 tests, given a possible score of 12 to 84. The higher the score, the higher the probability of having dark triad tendencies. Talks about passive aggressive, bullying, yada, yada, yada. You guys can go find this article if you want to know how to deal. Of course, there's all kinds of people in the interwebs that'll tell you how to deal. And I guess I've covered the wiki article before in the past, but again, using a variation of language I find important for communication, because you never know what's being miscommunicated by the connotations that people hold on words, whether correctly or falsely. And in the synthetic society, most people don't even understand half the words that they use most of the time. So narcissism is characterized by grandiosity, pride, egotism, and a lack of empathy. Machiavellianism is characterized by manipulation and exploitation of others, and an absence of morality, unemotional callousness, and a higher level of self-interest. Psychopathy is characterized by continuous antisocial behavior, impulsivity, selfishness, callous and unemotional traits, and remorselessness. And that's true. They don't have remorse. They don't have any of that. A factor analysis found that among the big 5 personality traits, low agreeableness, meaning that you don't easily go along with people, is the strongest correlation of the dark triad. Okay, so that goes to sociability. People that are more social are going to be higher in agreeableness. I am really high in agreeableness. Now, I know when to put my foot down with boundaries and stuff. I did not know most of my life. But that becomes a problem. And so you have to work that out and go, oh, wait a minute. I need to be less agreeable sometimes. I need to say no. I need to actually not so much embrace these things, but be a little bit, just a tiny bit like this, like not so much self-interested or callous or unemotional, but sometimes you might want to be a little callous when someone is being cruel to you and you need to set up your boundaries, right? Because they won't take you serious otherwise. I know I had a personal event recently about that. Someone was trying to take advantage of me and my good character, and I had addressed it with them numerous times. And then they finally found out that I am not a weak, sniveling, person who hides in the corner. I'm not someone you back in a corner, period. So, anyways. Psychopathy is characterized by continuous antisocial behavior. Well, antisocial behavior could just, could be misconstrued as being, introverted. But that's not what this means. Antisocial literally means that they do strange things in that ritual social situation that Jonathan Pajot was talking about. They are impulsive, don't have a lot of control over what they decide to do. They just go do it. Sounds like a good idea. It's on a whim. Might do something extremely dangerous because they don't have any real regard for life, even their own. And of course, remorselessness. You might be remorseless if you think you were right about something, right? So again, it's not these things unto themselves aren't necessarily bad. It is what is the prominence of their identity, right? So while neuroticism and a lack of conscientiousness were associated with some of the dark triad members, agreeableness and the dark triad show correlation change over development. And again, you guys can read this stuff. I kind of want to get to other material, but I just want to show, of course, some understandings of this from different perspectives. I'm actually not going to read this again for the sake of time. We're at 2 hours and 33 minutes. So I got about an hour and 30 to get through the rest of the show. And that means I need to load some video clips. So give me a minute for that, folks. Thank you all for being here. Thanks for watching. I know I haven't been too interactive with the chat today. It's because I actually want to stay on task. The biggest thing, as you guys probably know, you know me, is I like rabbit holes. I like to squirrel out, and that's fun if I can do like an 8-hour stream. I don't know if I have that capacity in me physically, but you know, I can't do 8-hour streams. I have things to do in life, I have a family to raise. All right, so we're gonna watch a couple video clips. They're really short. You know, before I was crediting everything. I try to as much as possible. These will be credited in the videos themselves, and this is from a YouTube channel. So I hope you guys enjoy. That is the channel. Psychopathy is. And these are interviews with psychopaths. What are some of the things you've done as a result of your psychopathy?
What are some things you've done as a result of your psychopathy?
Sometimes when I think about these stories, these guilt stories, I don't know what people would feel guilt about. So I do have a little bit of mind blindness there, you know, like I've never lived
Hey guys, real quick, we have our favorite bigot in the Entropy chat.
the life of somebody who feels this empathy, this guilt way. And so I don't know what might trigger it. I've never have really felt anything for animals. You know, I've never had a pet or ever felt like a connection to animals. I've never like tortured animals. I know, you know, some psychopaths do for various reasons. You know, I never was one of those that tortured animals. But one time I was teaching swimming lessons. I went out, I saw there was this baby opossum. It was like this big, you know, just like struggling to try to get out of the pool. And I thought, oh, baby opossum must have fallen in the pool in the night or in the early morning.
Dahari comes in every week to drop comments and then leaves. So I just like it when you guys go over there and chat. I don't know. It doesn't really matter to me. But whatever. Spook says hi.
And now he's trying to get out. But I also thought, you know, a possum is a pest. I don't want this opossum around me. If I fish him out, then who knows what he's gonna do. You know, even like domesticated animals can kind of turn on you, especially when they feel like they're kind of in that fight or flight kind of moment. So I was like, I'll just drown the opossum. What I did is just got a hose and just kept like hosing him. So he's trying to like get up and I'm just like trying to drown him with the hose. And I do that for like 5 minutes. And he's actually a trooper, this baby opossum. And so I thought, this is not working. I will just cancel the swimming lesson and just go off and do something else, you know, go to the beach for that afternoon. I think maybe that seems cold-hearted to people, the way I went about it. But that's just kind of, and that's kind of an interesting thing too.
So there's a couple things I want you to observe here. I want you to observe her body language, how really controlled it is. Right? It's actually really muted. Like her body itself is not shifting or moving a lot, but she has this smile, this smirk, and you can see she's reflecting in how her eyes are moving, right? So she is concentrating, coming back to this. And she's talking about this like this isn't a thing. Like it's not a problem. Oh yeah, I just tried to drown this possum. Not a big deal. Now, mind you, pest or pest, whatever. But that's a pretty cruel way to handle it. And yeah, she doesn't really think anything of it. And she's basically smiling about, oh, yeah, just tried to drown this possum. It was not a big deal. This is psychopathy.
We're socialized to think certain things are, different things are cold-hearted. And I guess I just am immune to socialization in general, most socialization. So one kind
high disagreeability, right? High. And this lady's a lawyer. She wrote a book on her finding out that she was a psychopath. She's one of the good ones, I would say, that actually went and got treatment and help for herself, because most people never care to do that.
of example that stands out to me is I was living in Los Angeles, and it was like a 12 unit apartment complex. It was kind of a nice apartment complex, and I was an attorney at the time, and I was like making, you know, like well into the 6 figures. And so it was very comfortable for me to pay the rent. But I noticed that my neighbors across from me, they were driving like 1980s, 1990s Civics. Both of them were driving these old Civics. And I kind of thought, I wonder how these people are paying rent. I thought of it sometimes. I also noticed though that since they parked right next to me, that they had these 2 bikes that were collecting dust. So I had a friend visit me one weekend, and I thought, let's go biking. And I thought, well, I have my bike, but I don't have a bike for you. I don't want to like have to drive somewhere and rent a bike. You know, it's very inconvenient. Let's just take my neighbor's bikes. So I went down and I pumped up the air, and the seats had dust on them. I mean, they clearly hadn't been ridden for years, and they were just little cheap.
Now, I want you to notice the lack of eye contact too. Again, she's recalling things, so she's glancing off to the side or whatever. She's actually that's a sign of recall. But you know, instead of addressing the camera directly a lot, she does it in little short spurts and it goes right back into recall. So she's very much wrapped up in her own world, right? It's not like she's actually trying to have this interactive thing with somebody. And of course, people can get carried away with body language and not understanding things. I think it's a lot simpler than people would like to understand. But if you feel like you're in a threatening situation, someone has a superior to you, you may not look them directly in the eyes. There's a thing with that, right? If you're trying to recall, you're going to kind of roll your eyes or look away or look down. So that's important. But notice how but looking away and recalling, right? Notice how she is doing that the majority of the time, not directly facing the camera like someone would if normally in an interview.
Win guys, you know, probably $100 bikes or something. So we bike, and then we come back several hours later. We bike to the beach. You know, it was great. It was fun. And then in the evening, I get this knock on the door, and I go answer it. Luckily, it was me and not my roommate at the time. But I answer it, and it's my neighbor. And she said, you know, my bikes were missing earlier. You know, we were looking all over for them, and then we noticed that they were replaced. Do you know what happened with the bikes? And I said, yes, I took your bike and I borrowed it and I took it to the beach with my friend. And she was like color drained from her face. And she was so angry at me. And she was like, why would you do something like that? And I'm gonna call the police, and that's theft. And I said, it's probably not theft. Technically, if anything, it's conversion, the tort of conversion. And you'd have to sue me in small claims court.
She's a lawyer, so she would know, right? See how that works?
And I don't think the damages would be very high because I just took it for several hours. And that was kind of my reaction, but she was like livid. The thing that people find most shocking probably about the book is when I say that I'm probably smarter than the person reading the book. And I find that to be unusual, an unusual reaction. To me, for that to be the most shocking thing in the book it surprised me. I didn't understand why they would feel that.
And it surprised her because she doesn't have empathy. And you're about to see why it surprised her. Actually, it makes complete sense, her answer. But most people don't, even really smart people, don't assume that they're the smartest person in the room all the time. But she doesn't look at the world the way normal people do. Normal, socialized people. People with empathy. People who have that balance between their individual character and their social character. Between the one and the collective. Those two things have to be in harmony.
Way, because that's just statistically true. I mean, I score in the 99th percentile on all standardized tests, you know, like on the regular. Maybe there's been once or twice when I have.
I'm not a good test taker, but I generally score in like the, 96, 98% on tests. And when I say that, it's because I know the answer. That's why I'm not a good test taker. I know the answers, but I mess up because I'm not a good test taker. I misread something or whatever, right? I definitely don't think when I'm walking around that I'm smarter than everybody. I don't think that at all. In fact, I try to assume and come to a position that people have information I don't know, and that I should seek that out and explore it.
Scored out of the 99th percentile, but even on graduate school tests or something, So I think, you know, that is probably the more shocking thing, is that I'm just willing to kind of own things. You know, I think people find me to be narcissistic. I think they think that, you know, I have such a big ego, when really I just kind of feel like, you know I'm 5'4", I know I weigh the amount of pounds that I weigh. I know that I am like the whatever size and underwear, bra, shoe, you know, and I also know that I'm in the 99th percentile for sure for intelligence, at least as it's measured on standardized tests.
So, which standardized testing for intelligence, IQ, which, by the way, folks, I know we talked about pattern recognition. That's all IQ really is. It's memory, recall, and pattern recognition, and understanding how to put it all together, more or less. Now, to be in the 99th percentile, if I'm not mistaken, means that she would have to have an IQ of probably 140. I might be wrong about that. It might be in the 130s, in the upper 130s, but somewhere around there. You're going to be in the 98th percentile if you have an IQ like above 126, 128-ish, something like that. This is off the top of my head from what I recall. I could bring up the charts, but then that will just delay the show as I go looking through the charts. All right, so I'm going to play, there's like 6 videos of her at least on this channel. I'm going to play like 2 more, and then I got another, a gentleman. And I wanted to present this to you from a woman first, because psychopathy is actually generally less known in women. It's more likely that they are going to have borderline or something, but it does affect women. And that is because of the very nature of women being more social, being more agreeable, and men being more antisocial, that is more disagreeable.
What is it like to go through life with psychopathy?
Honestly, having a personality disorder is like kind of wearing like glasses, you know, prescription glasses when you don't need them or something. It just kind of constantly distorts everything that you see around you, like funhouse mirrors. You know, it distorts how you view yourself, and it distorts how you view other people.
Okay, so let's address that right off the bat. I talked about this last week, I believe, or the time I streamed before that, you know, because I've been talking about these things in the synthetic society, the psychopathologizing of people, and the introduction of cluster B personality disorders onto the masses purposefully. I mentioned Josh Slocum and the work that he does on his Disaffected podcast. Excellent work. I'm going to try and reach out to the guy I already have, but I don't know if who I was talking to had any actual real connection to him. So that's, or who I messaged had any real connection to him, I should say. But you know, is what it is. If I can't, I can't. It's not a big deal. I'll live. Yeah, these people and their personalities have a distortion in reality. So when we're talking about Jonathan Pajot earlier and recognizing the patterns of reality, these people have a distortion of the recognitions of those realities. And psychopathy is one of the cluster B personality disorders.
So you don't really have the right, let's say, judgment or clear vision about yourself or what is good or normal, especially since you haven't been in touch with it maybe since you were like an infant, you know, or have never, you know, felt these types of emotions. You have no clue how to get in touch with them. Most of the time I would be feeling things like, you know, like joy, the happy ones, right? Never guilt, never even really sadness, never remorse, although sometimes I regretted things. So I was aware that I had kind of a dull, let's say, emotional palette, kind of more black and white than color. I still don't really feel fear. I definitely do take more risks than a normal person does. So, you know, I did skiing, snow skiing, like snow ski racing even, you know, and that was pretty dangerous. You know, you can die skiing pretty easily. I think I understood that, and I love to go fast. And I would describe nervousness this way. I can tell that my body is having a fight or flight reaction. It's almost like you can kind of taste the adrenaline happening. I don't feel nervous, but I know my body is nervous, kind of. People that are high performers, like sports athletes, you know, people like professional musicians, I guess they do get that spike in adrenaline, but they just interpret it as being like a sharpening factor in their performance. So now like the adrenaline's helping their brain to kick in a little extra sharp, and so they can do an even better job performing. And that's more how it feels, although you still feel like, you know, it kind of feels like jittery a little bit, like you have had too much caffeine or something. But that is what I feel. I do think maybe sometimes I'm still a little bit of a danger to myself, but I mean, I kind of just, I don't care. That's one thing that hasn't changed with therapy, is I still don't care. Like I would welcome death, you know, death is fine. I never thought of it as a problem until probably my mid-30s. And I think that's actually pretty common with the other psychopaths that I've met, is they, if anything, it seems like a superpower, especially I would say in your teens and into your early 20s through your 20s. Because what it kind of means is you just do not care what other people think. And if you
So, you know, this is highly advantageous in a lot of ways, and it is a superpower in a lot of ways. But no matter what, if you're using it to manipulate people and do poor, you know, have poor behavior, do bad things, hurt people, uh, that superpower is being misused. Was it X15 apologetics or X17 apologetics? I'm sorry. What's his name? Dr. Man, I can't remember his name. Anyways, that the individual that does that channel on YouTube, which I believe he's removing his channel soon, he is psychopathic. He talks about it. He tried to murder his father. He spent time in jail. He came to God in jail because he came to realize that no matter what he was, no matter how he thought and felt about things, if God was real and it was the truth, then he had to follow God's law. It's pretty interesting stuff. Why can't I think of his name? Somebody will probably know. You know, he does a lot of stuff against Islam. So I don't know, Spook, if you know who I'm talking about or not. But Dr. David Wood, that's his name. Got it. Came to mind. All right, let's keep going.
You can imagine, you know, normal people with your teenage years of insecurity or whatever else was going on. You know, I watch TV shows about it and it sounds miserable. It looks miserable. I don't know how you all got through high school, but for me, it was no problem because I didn't care what other people thought. And so it was just like completely free to do whatever I wanted.
And, you know, and we call this in our society, we call it self-esteem, and we call it, you know, living your best life. And we call it all kinds of things because if you're not being a psychopath, then you're being oppressed. Do you see how all of this ties in? Do you see how this society is fake? Do you see how you've been encouraged for at least 2, probably 3 generations to be a destructive force in our society? So I'm going to play, I think, one more of these. I want to make sure it's the right one because there's one really good, and then we're gonna hear from a guy.
What is your background, and how did you come to realize that you had psychopathy?
Okay, let me see what the other one is.
Why did you decide to get treatment?
Well, that's a pretty good one because she talks about the disparate relationship she had. So let's do that. You guys can check out the channel if you want to. The Psychopathy is channel on YouTube if you want to see more of this. And of course, this lady again wrote a book. There are multiple interviews over the internet with her. I just happened to come across this and thought, perfect.
So I would say that to find somebody professional to help.
Spook, I don't know. He's a just disingenuous person or not. He definitely is quite crass when he talks about the subjects, but you know, I mean, you've told me that Gad Sad lies too, and I don't know about that. He believes what he believes. I try to differentiate between what people say that might be untruths versus exact lies. But I also understand, and I actually applaud this of the Muslim world, that you guys are guard very jealously your faith. And unfortunately, in the Western world, it's not done so much. It depends. It does depend. But yeah, so I try regardless of what eyes or what people say. I try to come at things from eyes of understanding where the other person's coming from. And of course, I have my own world beliefs, my own worldview.
You is the best thing that you could do. I think the reason why I started thinking I needed help is because I realized that I did not have an alternative to manipulating. The only way that I understood how to interact with people was through manipulation. I didn't even know how not to manipulate people in my relationships, and that eventually kind of just always led to them having issues, you know, and then having these breakups. It wasn't until much later that I started taking it more seriously. It was after like 5 or 6 years. I had, you know, had some problems with my employment. I had some problems with various relationships, friends that like broke up with me, other relationships that broke up with me, problems with my family. And I thought, you know, there's a little bit of a pattern to this. Every 3 years or so, my life kind of just falls apart, and then I just, you know, reinvent myself, go to law school, start a new job, do whatever it was. But I thought, I'm getting in my late 20s now, and at this rate, I'm gonna run out of career options, and so this isn't gonna work out for me. And so I remembered, you know, the 5 years before, what I had thought about sociopath, and I thought this time I will actually look into it and see what I can make of it, see if it.
So some things she said there. There was a pattern that was reoccurring in her life. So she was able to then recognize that pattern and manifest something better for herself, because without recognizing what was going on in the pattern, her attention could not be drawn to it so that she could fix it, so that she could attend to the issue, to make it right, and to repent and the changing of her mind. Think about that as you saw what Jonathan Pajot was talking about earlier, because I promise you that a lot of what Pajot says and the way he breaks it down, and there's a lot more to that video than what I showed, is the same kind of thoughts that Peterson is presenting all the time, because they're close friends. But Peterson knows a certain amount of literature of things. Pajot's approaching it from an Orthodox Christian point of view, as well as a bit of a rationalistic point of view. But that is part of that logos and that rationale. And so again, when I sit here and talk about my faith and my religious beliefs, there's no chink in the armor, guys. It's all encompassing. It goes back to the very operating systems in which behind the scenes, behind this flesh and blood, in which we are working at, right? There are forces behind the scenes that, whatever they are, whatever the belief is and what they are, they're there, and they're operating and they're driving us. And until we can call attention to them and see where they're at, we are slaves to them. Okay?
It applies to me, see if I can learn more about myself, see if I can.
Mind you, I've talked about this repeatedly in my own life's journey, in the pattern I was presenting to myself with who I was attracted to, which was a bunch of cluster B personality people. So there's a pattern, right? And I had to repent and grow anew, become a new person, right?
Stop this pattern of every 3 years self-destructing and starting over again.
How has treatment affected you?
Stefan Molyneux and Freedom A Radio is still out there, man. I think he just goes on Rumble and other stuff. So he's still out there. He's just not as prominent because he's not on YouTube.
There are a lot of things that have gotten better since I have gotten treatment, since I've been seeing a good therapist. The thing that I found most helpful about...
I like that she prefaced that. A good therapist. One who actually is helping her, who actually knows what they're talking about, because there are a lot of bad therapists out there. We watched 2 of them during the Amber Heard Johnny Depp trial.
Therapy was all of my life.
No, I didn't have to be taught that it was wrong. I had to recognize, but this is the stuff I'm talking about. Spook, like like there are deeper things going on with us. I had to realize I wasn't a promiscuous guy, not till I was 30. Actually, I was 31. Um, I was 31, and it was after I was dating a narcissist, and I was completely. I didn't know how to. I mean, I didn't know what to do with myself, man, because I went through a long period of dysfunction and depression and whatever else because I was enslaved. So these things are deeper. Some people, fortunately, God's blessed me with some intellect where I could work myself out of it. Some people never have that. You do that to somebody. You put somebody with a flat 100 IQ through the stuff I went through. I promise you, they would have committed suicide. Or worse. And I don't like to go about into all the details of just crazy things. Half of it can't even remember because so desperate. It was such a terrible period of my life. But yeah, wasn't that at all. It's my look, man. My high school sweetheart was the salutatorian, missed valedictorian by like a 100,000th of a point or something like that. You know, a very smart girl, very hard worker. She had problems. I broke up with her 2 years in because of her possessiveness and controlling. This roots itself in my family itself, in my upbringing. So, and by the way, you can stick it anywhere you like. It's a matter of if you want to keep it and keep it around. That's the real thing.
I had never really felt self-expression. I never really felt like I had self-purpose or a sense of self-fulfillment because I really had such a weak sense of self. All my life I had kind of felt like a cipher, almost like, like a gas or a liquid that just occupies the space that it's in. I thought I fit in everywhere, but I really am nothing. If there's nobody around me, then I am nothing. Kind of like a chameleon, except the chameleon disappears when there's no one around,
And this speaks to when she talks about this, that again, that collective mentality that this is what I talked earlier, right? We were talking on the Professor Dutton video. These people hide in the collective, right? They don't have an actual self-identity other than I am maybe this victim, or I am someone who deserves power and control over people, that kind of thing. But these things run deep. And again, you have to know them. Like a lot of people, psychopaths, trust me, you do. They're out there. You've met one at some point in your life, probably if you're old enough. But you probably didn't know that they were one. And they might not even know that they're one either.
Or like kind of a hologram or something. Like you have to have the right situations in which I would appear. I would say after I kind of reintegrated kind of forgotten parts of myself into like a sense of self, into a sense of identity, because now I do. Now through therapy, I have like a sense of self, I have a sense of identity, I have self-expression. And because I have that, I think that my emotions, I have more complex emotions, right? Before it was all the primary ones like anger, frustration. I have a friend who went to kind of a therapy kind of like group session, and they were supposed to write down 3 emotions that they always recognize. And I think she wrote down happy, angry, hungry. And her partner in the exercise was like, hunger is not an emotion, but it is a feeling, And if you're kind of like psychopathic, then that's kind of where you're focusing, is like, this is what I recognize about myself. Those are the actual feelings that I feel regularly and I can recognize about myself. And then once, so that's how it was before. And now that I have like this sense of self, I think that because a satisfaction emotion, is a little bit more complex. It's way more complex to feel, for instance, fulfillment. In order to feel fulfillment, you have to have a sense of self. You have to, like where you are in life. There's so much context and nuance to it. And you really aren't able to feel that sense of fulfillment until you establish that sense of self. So after I did establish the sense of self, yes, I had like the, I don't know if it's the full palette of emotions, but it's way broader than it was before. So I do feel things like devotion, I feel things like loyalty, I feel things like disappointment when, you know, people do not live up to their end of the bargain. You know, all these kind of like social like emotions that you would have in reaction to somebody. I'm finally experiencing these. It's been hard to get better, and now it's hard to have emotions. It's great, but it's also hard.
So good for her. Like, she's fixed herself to some degree. She's now engaging in a part of life that was never possible or open to her before. And what did she do to get there? She humbled herself. She made herself humbled and said, you know what? Maybe there's an issue with me. Now, why she is a psychopath, well, that's hard to say. We know that psychopathy has something like 6 different genes that are connected to it. I think that's what it is, if I'm remembering correctly. But more importantly, we know that there is a strong environmental factor to it, a very strong one, in fact. And so that proclivity, and then being raised in a dysfunctional family, an abusive family, and in an abusive world and society, is going to exacerbate the potential for these people to exist. And we're doing it right now on purpose. On purpose, because we know the things that make societies healthy and strong. And I can promise you, it's not killing your baby. Well, didn't mean to do that. I want this one. So we're going to listen to this guy, and then
what is it like to be
we're going
psychopathic?
to talk about Roe v. Wade real quick. And then I'm going to just be off YouTube, but we'll still be streaming on Rumble and Entropy and DLive.
From my eyes, everything's hunky-dory. I'm perfectly fine. You know, I think I'm okay, and I think that it's been quite a surprise to find this all out, especially in my 60s, when I was always had heard and considered myself a really nice, good guy, and, you know, fun and a lot of positive things. There have been little punctuated things along the way from the time I was probably 10 or so that were unusual, that would pop out every once in a while in retrospect. So, you know, when I look back, you know, as you're going along, people will say to you, oh, you're crazy or something like that. And they go, you know, and then in the end they say, no, you're not crazy. That's not it. You're not crazy. It's not you're crazy. But you always, I think, not you always, but I think people would tend to think that comments that could be taken very negatively about one could be considered to be sort of ribbing, okay? You know, and it just, you know, a play in a way, or a mild dissent, like you're doing that thing, right? And I don't want you to, but instead of being serious about it, it's put in a funny way. And so oftentimes that's the way I took it. So I would, you know, up until the time was actually diagnosed.
So the individual that I was speaking of, that I believe is probably suffers from psychopathy, that I've gotten to know over the last I don't know, year or so, is exactly like this. People are being very serious, and he responds with laughter and shrugs it off. He's hunky dory. He's fine. He when people are mad at him or have issue, he blows it off and he doesn't understand. And then you can tell he's trying to work it out in his head, like the wheels are turning, but there's nothing churning out of it. And again, like I said, you probably know a psychopath too. They probably don't know that they're a psychopath, though.
Which wasn't that long ago at all. It was, you know, this is, you know, not that long ago when some psychiatrists and psychologists, et cetera, really, you know, made a diagnosis. But up until that time, I certainly didn't think anything. And so from my perspective, everything's okay. I never thought I ever tried to hurt anybody really, and any sort of a thing that I did, I've always considered play. And but it turns out that you get feedback, and once the dam opened up, a few years ago, then I hear all sorts of things which were more serious and more to the point and more congruent, where everybody was kind of agreeing with in a certain direction. So, but it's still, at one point, there were two psychiatrists I've known well for many, many years, and one of them, toward the end of this, he goes, "Well, what do you think about this?" I said, "What do you think about what? About what you have and everything?" I said, "Well, I don't care. I don't give a shit." And he said, "That's exactly the problem.
Yeah, right. I don't care. I would be like, I'd be remiss. I mean, how would you just not care if you're like, oh, you're a psychopath, guy? Okay. I mean, seriously, that should be alarming. But yeah, this is what psychopathy is, guys.
Really, truly don't care. And so that was, if you want to put it in a nutshell, it's like your problem is you really don't care in a very fundamental way.
One more from him about leadership and psychopathy.
Why do you think people choose psychopaths as leaders?
Since I was young, and here's another thing, because people would always ask me to be in leadership positions. Would you be the president of the class? Would you be the head of this? Would you be head of the hospital faculty? Would you be president of the academic senate? All those things, which I do. And I never asked for these at all, ever. People have always come to me and said, "We want you to lead this." And I still get this whenever there's, we can have something where it takes an extrovert to really be willing to make a fool of themselves, which I am, and a lot of this just is class clown stuff too. Okay, there's a lot of meld with this, but that has happened throughout my life and still does. I still get calls for big fundraisers, for everything to head it and chair sessions and everything, and it never asked to do that. So that's something that started when I was probably 8 or 9 years old. I was starting to ask to be in all these leadership positions constantly, and I like them. I like doing that, and I like putting groups together according to personality types and seeing, and it's manipulation, but it's, how do we manipulate each other in this group and create a dynamic that will work?
So what is he admitted right here? He's saying, I liked being in charge because I could take people and stick them together and manipulate them, right? That's a sense of power and control, right? He liked it. Now, for me, with leadership, I always approach it as a shepherd, where I want to do my best job to take care of my people so that they are happy and healthy and wealthy, right? That they're being fulfilled in their job and their needs are met. That is not a perspective of manipulation. That's a perspective of understanding that as an individual, I'm part of a greater social collective.
Okay, we'll come to a decision, but a thoughtful decision in all of this. And so even after all of this, after this book and all this crazy stuff, people still ask me to do it. And I said, I'd be chief scientific officer, or they want me to be a CEO or something like that. And I said, do you really want, I said, I got this stuff out there, they said about being a psychopath. You really want some of your business who's like, it's got a billboard sign psychopath over them. And it doesn't matter to them. It doesn't matter. In a sense, I'm so obvious, right? I'm so much out there. It's not like some sneaky guy. I was like, here I am. Okay, I have a problem with your morality, let's say. So, but in that sense, all of those leadership things are not something I try. I think it's just a natural thing, and it's a natural thing you can see in psychopaths too. So it's not just, I think, and I don't know the details of this, right? But you can see somebody wants to get in a leadership role so that they can steal or manipulate or do something. I don't think that's it. I think they naturally psychopaths have these characteristics with leadership, and it's also this fearlessness. You know, you're going to do something crazy, but you're going to do it for me, and I'll do
That's a big one. The fearlessness.
that. People know I'll do that. I'm going to go in and be a madman, and I'm doing it for you. You're my group, and I'm going to do it. And then I'll move on. Next group, I'll be doing
Because people like someone that fights for them.
it for you, and I think people know that. You know,
And most of them are too cowardly to do it themselves. So I'm going to leave this one here. There's a couple more minutes of that, but just for the sake of time. I haven't done that in a while. For the sake of time, let's keep rolling. Let me flip through real quick. And let me make sure. Just make sure I have everything. There were a few other vids I had set up. I don't know if I really want to get to them today, just for the sake of time. I was going to talk about Mark Levine. Had a video he put out last weekend. I think that we're in a post-constitutional America. I mean, duh. That's, dude, that the Constitution's been ignored for, well, the Civil War. So yeah, of course, Roe v. Wade came out, which is part of this conversation that I wanted to get to, versus Roe 2A and the psychopathy of our, of our synthesized society. And came across this actually this morning, and I thought it would fit in well here because Salty Cracker covered it really quickly. But this is a Twitter account that has a list of tweets. Well, if I can get to the list of tweets, maybe I should have went to the tweet directly. Pentagon announces it will refuse to follow state abortion laws. Anyways, here we go. It says, this has to be the dumbest tweet of the day. It's called exposing. Until this is exposed, this crap is going to continue. Enough of burying our heads in the sand and pretending it is not happening. And what this is this person, Night Vision, said, so have you ever considered how racist it is to retweet in any form or any reason, including intent to ridicule a racist tweet? No, it's not. It's called bringing things to light. In fact, I responded to this with Ephesians 5. And have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather expose them, for it is shameful even to speak of those things which are done by them in secret. But all things that are exposed are made manifest by the light, for whatever makes manifest is light. And, guys, I kind of live by these things. It's why I do what I do. So this person's like, this makes my blood boil, yada, yada, yada. Keep thinking about my little cousins who are mixed and raised in a conservative home. I wish people would stop talking about that and stop focusing on race, mixed or whatever. You're all mixed. Every single one of you. You're all mixed. Now, maybe you're white. Races came about or whatever at some point. We know the people that study these things, migration patterns and cultures of how people mix together and whatever. There are very few people that have undiluted blood that are not mixed with other races or ethnicities and cultures. But whatever, it's an issue that we talk about here. Like it's, I don't know, you're still people. Anyways, so these are all pictures. No, he's got a Caucasian wife, so doesn't that make him, and please nobody blame this on the phrasing or anything, but a Southern cracker / uppity. As I continue to work on this thread, I can't stop but thinking that these children and adults who are mixed and living in a nightmare, the leftist whites, you are the N-words trash if you disagree with them, and you in the black community, you are Uncle Tom or a coon. Yes, Yes, and there's this thread is like long. It's just repeated. Well, I guess it's not the same thread, but anyways, you go in here and find this. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but it's just the glaring hypocrisy of the left. And of course, I'm out of content. Yeah, whatever. And a lot of these people are deleting all these things, right? But then this, the Babylon Bee, or not the Bee, actually reposted this. This was pretty important because this is where we're at. You don't like the decision yesterday, and today you're really not going to like the next part. I mean, it's your fault, but you're not going to like it. He's talking about the Roe v. Wade decision, the decision to murder your babies. Actually, before I play that, let's play this before I forget that I even have this clip, because I pulled this up mid-show. Got to get it. Here we go. Here we go. So earlier it said, remember the abortionists, the people that were pro-abortion and what they were going after, and the psychopathy, the narcissism, the Machiavellianism of all of it. Listen, watch, observe. Tell me what you think.
An abortion after birth, would you support that? I believe in whatever the woman wants to choose to do, that's her choice. At any point of the child's life? At any point of the lady's life, that's her choice. To kill another person's body? It's going to always be her choice. Even after the baby's born? It's always her choice. So if they're 2 years old? It's always her choice. I can kill my 2-year-old? It's a woman's right to choose. To kill their child at any point. It's a woman's right to choose.
It's a woman's right to choose if she can sacrifice her child to Baal and Molech. Oh, man. Anyways, back here to Dr. Strange tweet. See, we were cool with the status quo. Yeah, we wanted abortion to go back to the States. Yeah, we wanted gun rights expanded. Yeah, we wanted our kids safe from LGBTQ indoctrination. But it wasn't enough to fight about, right? Because we could handle those things at home, and you guys were not encroaching that far. We thought you were like us, that we could argue and make small gains and lose some ground, but everything stayed fairly level and level-headed. But boy, were we wrong, because we were copacetic and just going along to get along. You were pushing. And I've talked about this. You cannot go along to get along. You have to manifest your own destiny in life, because if you don't, you will be enslaved by forces out of your control. God demands, if you are a Christian, that you take control of your life. Now, part of that is giving him control and not trying to manipulate and control every little thing, right? But it means living with a purpose for him in his kingdom. You pushed abortion from legal, safe, and rare in these specific instances. You push now to the point of post-birth abortion on demand for any reason. Video I just played, case in point. You push gun control from background checks and gun-free zones to now red flag laws which deny due process. You push the right of gay marriage to now the right of LGBTQ teachers telling kindergartners about their sex life. You are insane. And during all of this, you push disagreeing politically to call us Nazis and justifying violence against us, justifying harming our families and our jobs. How is this not psychopathologizing? So now we push back. We pushed back with Trump. We pushed back with state legislators. We pushed back with school boards. And we haven't even begun to push back, kiddo. We're going to push abortion back to the rare side in many states. I think, 12 states have trigger laws where they completely outright banned abortion, if I'm not mistaken. We may give you a time frame like 12 to 15 weeks, but what your beloved other industrialized nations give, we may not. That's actually the standard of Europe. It's 12 weeks, I believe. We're going to push back on gun control. We're not going to accept your offer of you can keep some guns until we decide to get rid of them too. We're going to elect legislators to make We're going to elect legislators to make ownership easier. We're claiming our rights back. We're going to push back on the LGBTQ agenda. We're going to make your lives miserable when you try to get our kids to question their gender. We're going to remove the power you think you have and put it in the hands of the parents where it belongs. You had a chance to call a truce. You had a chance to be in control and be happy. You had a chance to just leave us alone, and you didn't. You pushed and prodded and provoked, and you've threatened to commit violence now. Good luck with that. As I showed you that short clip earlier of the vets in 1989 defending themselves in Oregon from the Crips. Now, that might not be me, but I guarantee you there's some vets out there that do not care. They don't have the religious convictions I do. And it doesn't mean I'm going to be an easy target for you either. I can promise you that. And I have God on my side. I guarantee you he will protect me in ways you cannot even imagine. There's a saying about the danger of making people who want to be left alone get involved. You've made us get involved. So all of it from here on out is squarely on you. Enjoy the whirlwind you have deservedly reaped. Well, amen to that. And reaped they have. Guys, I am going to say goodbye to YouTube. We're going to go straight into Rumble. And I'm going to give you a couple minutes to make that transition. If you're on YouTube and you're watching, there's a link in the description for the Rumble channel. And in fact, what I will do is put it in the chat right now. And I'm going to do this because, well, there are things that I need to speak of, I need to talk about, I need to address. And I would like to be able to stream next week. I'd like to be able to stream Thursday if given the opportunity. So in order to do that, I cannot share this information on YouTube because YouTube's trying to psychopathologize you. YouTube's trying to make you have a cluster B personality disorder. YouTube wants you to believe false information and to treat them like the gods that they believe they are. So with that, we're going to have a 30-second countdown, and then we're going to be live on Rumble. We'll still be on DLive and Entropy. All right, let's go.